Oh, sorry. Notice of this meeting was provided to the Bernardsville News, Courier News, and the Star Ledger, filed with the municipal clerk, and posted on the municipal bulletin board on August 31st, 2020. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I got my flag. Okay. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
to
the
United
States of America, to the republic which is stands one nation under God, liberty and justice for all.
Justice for all. Hard to get that all coordinated. So right now we do have an open session. I don't know if we have any public. I don't think we do. Oh, there's John's here. Anyone from the public wants to speak? You have an opportunity now. Seeing none, I will close the public session. And at this point, we are going to, I guess, introduce Keith Covington from Common Ground, who did our rezoning way back when, and it's been around a while, but you know, it was a work in progress, and I think we're at the point now where it's time for the council to hear about it, and I think you are going to give us an overview of what's different and what's new, and I will turn it over to you.
Mayor, do you mind if I say a word or two before we get started?
Say as many as you'd like.
So thanks everybody for joining in this special session. So obviously the purpose here is for us to understand. I know that many working pieces have been going on really that predate me. Know that the planning board spent months, I think we first took this up in January, and deliberated extensively over many of the finer points of this. I think there's really two important points if I'm sort of giving my opinion here. There's the concept, which I wanted Keith to present today, which I think is really important, because at the end of the day, the decisions that we're going to make over the next few weeks, may change the way that we develop our downtown for the next 30 to 40 years. So the concept's really important. Within the context of that concept, I think the planning board in this deliberation have gone with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that not only was the concept achievable, but it's also clear, and it's something that in the discussions with potential builders and or developers that can be implemented. So with those words, I'll turn it over to Keith, and I'll let you take it there from here, Keith.
Can I ask just one question quickly?
Yeah, please.
So, we had our regularly scheduled meeting, which is what, the 14th, I think, 11 days from now. So the purpose of this one being on the 3rd was so we could just focus on the discussion on this one item, or because we have a time constraint for something?
In my opinion, it's a focus on this one item, and I felt it was important for the council to understand and sort of be brought back up to speed on what's been done, because it's been some time since you've seen this, and it's a big piece of it's a big ordinance.
Well, there is some of a time constraint, because we want to make sure that these elements get into the downtown development plan and that they're synced and coordinated, and we'll be, I think, introducing that on the 14th.
Yeah, you mean the Quimby Village idea?
Yeah, we want to make sure that any changes we've made in the zoning become part of that plan.
Understood, although the Quimby Village can have its own set of guidelines that are above and beyond anything that's written here anyway. So, the Quimby Village decisions are not mandated to be the same as what's written here. They could be different at any rate anyway. It's nice if there's as much consistency as possible, and I agree with that idea. So I don't have a problem with it at all. But the Quimby Village redevelopment plan, it really doesn't need anything specific written into this plan. This plan is really for the overall town, and Quimby Village may look very, very much similar to it, or it could look different, and either of those would be acceptable for Quimby Village, correct?
Yes. I think the point you made, which I think was a good one, is to have the consistency, I think, which is.
Yeah. And Jeff, I can tell you that in the deliberations, we clearly thought in doing this that Quimby Village, and then Keith, you can speak to this if you feel differently. should apply to what we're doing here in many ways. There may be some variations, but the essence of what we're doing here should be consistent between the two.
Well, just to be clear, it was portrayed to me when I had my meeting with topology that this was to be the plan for Quimby Village.
Yeah.
Yes, it was for the broader borough, but I'm surprised to hear that Quimby Village could conceivably be something totally different.
Well, I think there for an example, Quimby Village may have a height, particular height requirement on one side of the road or another, which is outside of what's written in this overall plan for the town. So the overall plan from the town would provide consistency town-wide, but the Quimby Village might have some area of exception, which isn't fully consistent with this zoning ordinance, but is unique and appropriate for Quimby Village.
That's right. That's the purpose of the
If I might.
redevelopment plan. But one point with regard to the timing, there was some email correspondence going back and forth tonight among members of the planning board, and they're going to adopt a master plan reexamination, which will allow Anthony to not have to give notice to all properties within 200 feet of any of these zoning changes. So they're trying to synchronize that reexamination so we can just give normal notice of introduction of an ordinance.
Well, and Jeff, I guess going back to the original, not Jeff, Tom, we had initially talked as a council that we felt it was important that we sat and talk about this anyway. So that I think that's the overriding principle here. We wanted to give this special time.
Yeah, just happy to do that, and give it the focus that it deserves. I just think so that Jeff and I are on the same page. The topology idea is that it's fairly consistent with the overall vision and objectives of this zoning ordinance update, but the Quimby Village can have individual exceptions, or the Quimby Village redevelopment plan may have differences that are not included in this overall zoning plan. The Quimby Village is not solely and 100% going to be limited to only what's in this plan. It could be, but it could go beyond it, or it could be more restrictive. Yeah, it could go either way.
I'm hearing you now. What I'm just saying is that was not the thrust of the discussion, where I spent a considerable amount of time going over the plans for the plaza, going over the plans for the park, going over the height issues, and how that would interface with the parking plans. So all this was portrayed, at least what I think we're discussing tonight, was part and parcel of an overall plan for the borough. It was not clear that Quimby Village may have a totally separate plan. I'm actually not really happy.
I think the phrase "totally separate" I wouldn't agree with. I think what they have is something that's largely consistent and maybe somewhat different on certain exceptions. Mayor, do you want to say something?
Well, I was going to say, the plan that you reviewed, Jeff, with topology is the plan that's moving forward. So
For Quimby Village.
yes, it's not going to, there's not going to, so if you were okay with how that was presented, that's what's going forward. It's not going to be redone.
Okay, so then how is that? I mean, I read, it's hard to read things that aren't side by side and see what the differences are. Hopefully tonight somebody will point out what are the differences between this plan and the Quimby Village one. I was generally happy with the Quimby Village plan. There was a couple questions and suggestions I had, and we had a very good conversation. And it looks like a lot of what we've mentioned are in this plan. I'm now just confused that there's two different plans.
Yeah, and Jeff, let's talk, because Keith actually has done a consistency review. So Keith, if you want to take it from here, I think that's an important perspective.
Thank you, Chad, and both Councilman O'Day and Hammond. That I appreciate this conversation. Now, let me preface what I'm about to say with the fact that I don't have the Quimby plan in front of me, and I don't know it as well as the downtown design guidelines, but I can give you a little bit of perspective on how this all came together. And as Chad just said, I have reviewed the Quimby Lane plan, or at least an earlier version of it, very recent version of it. And they are very close. They're very, very consistent. Some of the things, and I'll give you one key example. One of the things that was an important part of the Quimby plan was the creation of this public plaza in the center of that block with the buildings that front that plaza. And if I don't know if many of you knew this, but that's kind of how we got involved in this project. Is we started working on just Quimby Lane. So we've sort of been a part of that process. Now, we haven't been a part of creating the redevelopment plan because we've been focused on the downtown portion, but we were involved in that. So we're very, very familiar with that. And I know for a fact that in the redevelopment plan, there are requirements specific to those parcels about helping to create that plaza and how do we frame that plaza and so forth to make it a great public space. Those are things that are so site specific that they would not end up in this overall, downtown design standards piece. So that's a great example. And I think that is in a nutshell what you see. In general, in terms of the type of environment, urban, village environment that we're trying to create here, that the two are in pretty much lockstep, but there are specifics to that particular piece, like the plaza and some other things that might be a little bit different. So hopefully that explains. And I agree with Councilman O'Day. I think if anything, other than maybe height, the Quimby Lane plan is probably maybe even more restrictive because of those specific objectives that you all are trying to achieve. So does that help on that, at least that aspect of it?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to make. Yes, to some extent, and I think I guess the devil's in the details, and they'll all be threshed out as we discuss it.
I hope so. I appreciate the opportunity to see you all again. Of course, last time we did something like this, we were all in person. But so be it. That's the world we live in right now. It is great to be here. Jeff Horowitz is also here with us, and he's going to join me in doing a kind of a brief overview, as Chad had requested us to do. And so my question is, I have a PDF to share. Can someone allow me to share my, I guess I could just click share my screen and see if it'll do.
I made you a co-host, Keith, so you should be able to share it.
Awesome. All right. I think I've got it up right here. Okay. Can everyone see an aerial view of downtown?
Yes.
There.
Yes.
All right. So anyway, let's see here. I don't know if I can make this go. All right, I can't allow it to go full screen, but hopefully you'll be able to see this. So I'm going to make this as concise as possible, and of course we will have plenty of time for questions and discussions. So what I'm going to start with is just a really brief project recap. It's very condensed from what we went through the last time I met with you all. Then I'm going to get into an overview of the standards, which will hopefully provide a little bit more perspective and detail as to what the standards, how they apply, and what they will yield. And then Jeff is going to talk briefly about the planning board's review and potentially and some of the revisions related to that. And then we'll just open it up for discussion. So if everyone's good with that, I'm going to keep rolling here. So just a quick reminder, the purpose of this was to adopt new development regulations that would replace and or supplement your current regulations so that we could implement the recommendations for your downtown that are in the Bernardsville master plan. And when we say Bernardsville Master Plan, that includes many of the updates that have occurred. And if you look in the proposed ordinance language that John Sabo put together, you will see all of that listed there. So, this is something that I believe, as Chad said, has been going on for quite some time. And we're just trying to follow through and help to implement that. Also, just a quick reminder for the public that may be out there watching us, we did this through a 4-step process. We worked with the downtown committee throughout this process. We started with just sort of getting an understanding of your community, and then meeting with the downtown committee and members of the planning board. And then we did a draft of the design standards, went back, presented that with the committee and made revisions, and then came up with a final draft that we then presented to the council in a public presentation. There were lots of folks there. And that all occurred in late 2019. Since that time, the planning board, thanks to the council's recommendation that it go to the planning board, the planning board has been reviewing this in depth, in detail, poring over it, and getting it into the form that you see, that you have hopefully today. So that's kind of gives you a quick overview of where we've been. So again, just for anyone who doesn't remember, this is the project boundary. So that black dashed line that you see, so going up Claremont Road, heading out Mine Brook Road, just past Woodland, encompassing the downtown, the core of downtown here, out Morristown Road, all the way to Madisonville, and of course around North Findlay there.
Keith, if I could just pause.
Yeah, can I interrupt you real quick, Keith?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's really important to realize that this new redevelopment area, it involves, at least for me, areas of our town that we typically would not have thought as downtown, which primarily is as you go down past the Bookworm into the Claremont area. There are some areas that are now considered, which I think are important for this plan.
Yes, and I was going to suggest, to Councilman Hammond's point earlier as well, one of the major differences between the Quimby Lane project and this project is the scope and scale, the area that this covers. And this isn't, not to correct you, Councilman McQueen, this is not a redevelopment plan, but rather this is it's redefining the zoning for this area.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
That is absolutely right. So the current zoning within this boundary is a mix. It's not all B1. Your B1 zoning, which encompasses the core of your downtown, actually extends out on one side of Claremont Road, the east side, all the way up to, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank on the streets up there, but it's right in this area here. As you see, you've got a little bit of R4, you've got a lot of C1, a little bit down here near the train station, but a lot of C1 along Morristown Road. You've got Highway District where the strip shopping center is now, and then you've got OB office building here. So there's a variety of current zoning districts. And
can I just ask a quick question? We were talking about, Chad, when you said that this, this normally wouldn't be considered a downtown, but it is the redevelopment area, as Councilman O'Day pointed out. But when did the redevelopment area change?
This is not the redevelopment area. We're just talking about changing the zoning.
Zoning.
The
Yes.
Redevelopment area
Zoning in
is
the
just
downtown.
Quimby Lane.
Okay.
yeah,
Yes. I misspoke, Tina.
Sorry. Yeah, the redevelopment plan is actually focused on the Quimby Lane area. This are new zoning standards that would be applied to everything that you see in that thick black line.
Okay.
So they're
how
complementary.
did this district, I guess, then come to be the district?
Great. That's a very good question. This came out of the downtown plan, the downtown committee's discussion on what the boundaries should be for this project. Obviously, this is the historic core of downtown. But number one, your B1 zoning extends up to Claremont. So even though you may not consider Claremont downtown, it has the same type of current zoning as your downtown. So there was an interest in definitely encompassing all of the B1. As far as the train station, obviously, and the property surrounding that obviously was felt to be close to being part of downtown. And then these other areas, out Morristown Road to there was, because they were the primary commercial areas in your community, the downtown committee decided to expand that boundary to include those. Does that help?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. It's essentially where all of our commercial businesses are, but
exactly. And in fact, that's a great segue, because what this new zoning would do is basically replace everything that you see in this area with this new these new districts. Okay. And I'll explain that in a second. So kind of piggybacking off of that a little bit, we understand that even though the area goes beyond your historic core, like I pointed out about Claremont Road, the same is true with Morristown Road and all the way out to Madisonville Road, and even down here near Woodland. There are different characters in this area. It's not a one size fits all. Not everything is like your historic core. So instead of just saying, okay, we've got this boundary, we're going to apply the same standards everywhere, what we did was we identified these different, what we call sub-districts. So those districts that I just showed you, all of those would essentially go away. And what they would be replaced with is these 4 sub-districts. And each of those sub-districts are going to have standards with them that are intended to, create the kind of environment that those areas should be based on, your town master plan and so forth. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? So we have 4 distinct areas. There's some similarities, but there are distinctions between the 4. Okay. So the first question that we always get asked when we're doing things like this is, when do these standards apply? So I wanted to go through this real quickly. So obviously any new development would be held, if you approve this, okay, any new development would have to adhere to these standards. If you have additions to existing buildings, new additions to existing buildings that meet a certain threshold of size and location, then those additions have to meet the standards of this new downtown district. If you make certain modifications to existing buildings, so you're not adding on, but you're making certain modifications to the building facades, those modifications need to be in line with the design standards. And then routine repair and maintenance, that can occur as long as you replace things and repair things in kind, as we say, then you can keep it the way it is. But if you change it, then you have to adhere to the standards. So this is really important. Those 4 distinctions are really important because, all new development, that's a no-brainer, right? But when you start to talking about additions, modifications, routine repair and maintenance, that's where it becomes a question of, when does this apply? So we try to establish that. And also, it's important to note that with those 3, additions, modifications, routine repair and maintenance, you're really only focused on what you're doing. It doesn't mean that you then got to take the whole existing building and bring it into a compliance. Okay. It's only when you're modifying that building. Finally, if you have a change of use, but you're not doing anything to the building, then the standards don't apply. You don't have to retrofit the building to fit that, but you may have to adhere to new parking standards or things like that. So that's an important distinction. And then obviously existing development is grandfathered. Okay, so this is not a retroactive ordinance. This does not go back and say, okay, everybody who doesn't comply, you now got to go spend a lot of money to bring your building into compliance. It doesn't do that. Okay, so that's an important piece of all of this before we even get into the standards. Okay. Now I'm going to get into kind of an overview of the standards. I'm not going to go through every tiny detail. I mean, we're happy to answer any questions that you have, but I want you to get an understanding of how it's structured and what it's intended to produce at the end. Obviously, number one, what you see on the right in these images are images of buildings that were identified by us, but also especially the downtown committee, as buildings that are contributing to the character of your downtown. Okay, so what we're trying to do is really reinforce what you have now that is so great about Bernardsville. So this is an important part of that. Each one of the design standard categories has an intent statement that tries to tie it back to Bernardsville. So that's the number one thing to keep in mind when you think about the standards. But as far as the standards go themselves, we do talk about land use. Okay, there's a list of land uses that are permitted, and there's a list of land uses that are expressly prohibited. And there are also some standards for certain things that that help, like sidewalk cafes. That's a great example. There are, specific standards that are related to that go beyond just, whether you can have them or not. We have standards related to lots. So if a lot is created, and you redevelop a lot, completely redevelop it, what's the maximum coverage of building and impervious surface that you can have there? There are standards related to the placement of buildings. And this is a crucial one because this is very, very important in terms of whether you're trying to create a different character or you're trying to preserve an actual character. Each of those sub-districts have setback requirements. So in the core area and the Claremont area that is most alike your current downtown, the buildings are required to be closer to the sidewalk. But in the corridor and the gateway sub-districts, you're allowed to be a little bit farther back. Not a sea of parking in front of your building, but allowing for a limited amount of parking so that we get some street wall, if you will, but we acknowledge that there is that this is a little bit more car oriented in those areas, and so a little bit of parking up front is there. So that would be the requirement there, and then also requiring additional sidewalk where there is insufficient sidewalk width. Now, this is particularly important in your downtown core, where you're going to have the most pedestrian activity. So, even if the setback, says you've got to be right behind the existing sidewalk, if the existing sidewalk is not an appropriate width, in this case, at least 8 feet, then you have to set your building back a little bit farther to make sure that we get that sidewalk. This is the way that we, yes.
Sorry, Keith. No, Keith, if I can make a point, and what I wanted to do tonight is so that you guys understand, this was a point of a major discussion. Jeff, I think we might have spent 3 entire meetings on this, especially Jeff's brought up the Quimby Lane project. As everyone's aware, there are sidewalk sections of that plaza that aren't sufficient right now. So in this new ordinance, actually the sidewalk width is increased to 8 feet in that area. So just realize that this was an issue that was highly deliberated and I think really important to this overall plan, Keith. So thanks for that.
Yeah, and actually with the setback, again, I'm sorry to get into the detail, but it's actually closer to 10 feet in that area because you've got to have a minimum of 8 feet, but the building sets back a little bit. So you essentially have 10 feet. And as Chad was just pointing out, we have some severely limited sidewalk widths in the downtown core. And so this is a great opportunity to address that when it comes to redevelopment, obviously. So Quimby is a perfect example of that. The standards also address building height. And this is an important thing. We measure building height both in stories and the number of feet. And the table that you see on the right was something that Jeff put together as part of a summary of some of the changes that have happened since we last presented this. And on the top, you can see here are the sub-districts, the new proposed sub-districts: Core, Corridor, Gateway, and Claremont. You can see the proposed number of stories and the number of feet. And then the current B1, C1, OB, and HD, you can see down below. So the only thing I really want to point out here, at least at this point, is that you can see that in the core, the proposed height is 3 stories plus the number of feet. And in the corridor, 2.5 stories. In the gateway, 3 stories. In Claremont, 2.5 stories. That's all not too significantly different from what you have now, which is essentially 2 or 3 stories and then 2 stories in OB and HD. So B1 and C1 have potential for 3 stories. So the height, this was something that we talked about early in the process. This was before even the planning board did its review. What is the height? And I think everyone sort of felt like, based on the downtown survey that was done and the vision master plan, that 3 stories was really kind of the max. And so that is what was driven, what drove those proposals. The standards also address the articulation of buildings, and that really is concerned with how do you break down the mass of a building. So take, for instance, the image that you see at the bottom. This is in my hometown where I live now. This is downtown Franklin, Tennessee. And I took this picture because I think it's an excellent example of articulation. Those 3 seemingly different buildings are actually one building. But what avoids the massiveness that you get with a building such as this is the fact that you have articulation in the building, recesses, projections in the facade, changes in the roof form, the windows, and so forth. So we had to include some articulation standards to kind of help promote that. And again, if you look at your own buildings in your own downtown, the historic buildings, they have this similar sort of articulation. So we wanted to make sure that we captured that. We also have standards related to attachments, and attachments are just that. Those are things that are attached to the facade of the building. And they can range from, a bay window on a more residential looking structure to an awning like you see here on a more commercial Main Street, what I would call Main Street structure. We also have standards related to transparency. We know that in a downtown area, that having more transparency, i.e. more windows at street level, creates an environment that potentially is more active, which is where your pedestrians are. But even above that, the windows above that, avoiding blank facades is the key here. So when we talk about articulation, attachments, and transparency, it's all about trying to encourage or require a level of activity and avoid that sort of massiveness of buildings. Parking. We obviously address parking. And we address it from not only the required amount of parking, but the location of that parking. So again, from Jeff's summary, this is, and I don't expect you all to read this list. You can see it in the ordinance, but Jeff has the uses that were established as part of the 4 sub-districts and the proposed parking. And what you'll see is that in some instances, the parking requirements were reduced slightly. This is typical for a downtown. Downtowns are not suburban areas. They are intended to be areas where people park once, whether that's on the street or behind a building in a parking lot or in a parking structure, and then walking to several different places. So we reworked the parking requirements in some respect. In some areas, we left them similar, but for the most part, we reduced that a bit so that we could encourage more building and less parking. We don't want downtown or any of these areas to be completely driven by parking. We want them to be driven by the development that's going to bring good uses to Bernardsville. But we also have to think about the location of that parking. And by location, I mean that in sort of two different levels. Number one is, in a downtown, parking is not in front of the buildings. It's in the center of the block. It's to the side of the building and so forth. So in some of these areas in Claremont and in the downtown core, parking is required to be behind the buildings or otherwise hidden. Okay. And then in areas such as the gateway and the corridor areas, recognizing that those are a little bit more auto-oriented, there is some parking limited really to just one double-loaded aisle in front of the buildings. Okay. So the majority of the parking is behind, but if you have a redeveloped site, there could be a little bit of parking in front.
Keith, what do you mean by double-loaded aisle?
Oh, sorry. That is one driveway with parking on either side. Okay, so that's one aisle of parking as opposed to what you have now in, let's say, the HD district, where that building is set all the way to the back of the lot and there's a big parking lot in front of it. That is not what the vision is for the future, but that area is definitely a little bit different than your downtown, where the buildings are close to the sidewalk and all of the parking is to the rear. Okay. And also, when I said there was kind of two tiers to the location of parking, there's also the aspect of encouraging shared parking and also allowing buildings, because a lot of times you're dealing with tight sites, to meet their parking requirements off-site as long as it's within a certain distance. So parking is not just about a number of cars related to a use. It's about where it's located, how you access it, and so forth. And these are just some examples. This is parking in the middle of the block in a development near downtown Atlanta. Here's parking that's actually a little bit of parking that's adjacent to the street, but you can see how it's nicely screened. This right here is actually a building that hides a parking structure, but the parking structure is designed to look like a building. Okay. And so that's an important thing too. Sometimes you have a little bit of a parking structure. I mean, if you have a parking structure and a portion of it faces a street, you can design that parking structure to look like a building. And we've included those kind of standards in your ordinance. And then, of course,
sorry, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You mentioned shared parking. So is that something, say, during the day, it's a 9 to 5 office building, but at night, the restaurant could use those spaces as
that? That is correct. So a consultant could present to the planning board a shared parking plan that says, okay, this is how it works. Here are the calculations. This is how we can share parking spaces, because just what you said, Mayor, just how when the spaces are going to be used. And so that's something that's has been expanded a little bit too. So you can get an idea that parking is, again, not just about the number of parking spaces. And then also we have standards for the architecture. And in some instances, these are guidelines and not necessarily requirements, but they're broken up into 4 basic categories. Facades, so that's the face of the building, okay?
Sorry,
Roof.
Can I?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I had lost you for a second. So I just wanted to ask about the parking real fast again, because I think the district you were talking about, I don't have the numbers and all that in front of me, but when you were talking about, the massive parking in the front, we're talking, mostly like ShopRite and the King's, the center, the Bernardsville Center.
Yes.
So we're saying that with this ordinance that they would, if any substantial changes were made to either of those buildings, they would have to move their parking or their whole buildings to where they only had one layer of parking in the front.
if they made major changes, really on something like that, most likely the only way they would be forced to do that is if they scraped the site and started from scratch. Okay. You wouldn't necessarily, if you added on to that building into any of those buildings, you probably would not do something that would actually require that sort of reconfiguration. So that would really be more major development.
So Keith, I don't know if you recently saw they changed the facade dramatically on the Bernardsville Center. They updated it quite a bit. You know, it looks pretty nice all in all. But if this plan had been in place when they first started that project, would they have been subjected to the facade requirements that are in here, even though the parking requirements that Councilwoman McCready just talked about wouldn't have applied because they're just changing the facade? The facade requirements would apply.
That's correct. That is correct. That is correct.
Okay. That was just a hypothetical, that this plan didn't exist, so they predated this plan.
Yeah,
So,
I was wondering the same though, Councilman O'Day. So,
but that's a
thanks
great
for the
question.
clarification. Yeah.
So hypothetically, if this ordinance were in place and they wanted to cosmetically fix the frontage of their building, would they have been able to do what they did?
Well, they certainly would have been able to improve their facade. I can't speak to the specifics of what they did. I mean, obviously I've seen it, I've walked by it, but it's been a while. But I think that, yes, I mean, they would have been able to do that, but they did not do anything that would have forced them to somehow, remove that parking, if
Right.
that makes sense.
I think the more important point is if somebody decided to, in the future, this ordinance were in place, somebody decided to change their facade in a similar fashion to what the Bernardsville Center has already done. If somebody else wanted to do some similar scope project, they would be subject to these now new design standards.
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. Okay. So again, facades are obviously the face of the building. Roofs are obviously what's on top of the building. Openings are windows and doors, and attachments, as we've already talked about, are things that are attached to the facade. So you can sort of see a porch here. You can see a bay window here. You can see awnings in this photo down here. So, in the architectural standards, and we'll, my last slide, I think it may be my last slide is the next one. I'll talk a little bit more about the architecture, but it's important to note that each of these characteristics contribute to a building. And so the standards are there to try to help promote a kind of design standard or design level that would be commensurate with your existing character and new character in the future. Landscaping and screening. There are standards for landscaping and screening, primarily related to the screening of parking that's visible from a street, trash, and other equipment. There are standards related to frontages, like the entrances to building, as well as the streetscape. We talked about the wider sidewalk and so forth. And that also includes potentially street trees and things like that. There are standards related to lighting, which addresses both lighting on the building as well as site lighting to kind of focus on the building and the areas where you need, lighting for pedestrians and so forth, but trying to avoid spreading that light everywhere else on beyond your site. And then signage, although the signage piece, I just want to, I brought this up not to confuse you, but just to say that we did address signage, but it's going to be part of a separate piece that the town's looking at. So on architecture,
Sorry, why
Yeah.
was that decision made to separate signage when all of this is in
yeah,
this one?
I think I can't recall, Jeff, you might be able to help me out here, but Jeff Horowitz, but I think it was the council is re-looking at the signage across the entire community. And so they just wanted to incorporate what we had done into that, as opposed to having it spread out in two different areas.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. I mean, go ahead,
think because some of this discussion happened when I was on the planning board, and I think the idea was that there was a fairly extensive sign ordinance in town already, some of which we felt was, poorly worded or unenforceable or could have been improved. So the concept was to not have some signage requirements in this design standard ordinance and other signage requirements in a separate sign ordinance, which then might be both confusing or contradictory. So they took the recommendations from the design standards work and said, incorporate those same recommendations into the pre-existing sign ordinance, update the sign ordinance as well for any other areas that were confusing. So we have a sign ordinance, which is fully consistent with this, but a standalone ordinance. And then we have this, rather than have sign ordinance pieces in two places.
Right.
Yeah, I guess I'm confused as to why all the sign ordinance stuff isn't just included in this one for kind of consolidated standpoint.
I think it was because of the complexity of the pre-existing sign ordinance.
Yeah, thought some of that complexity was still required.
I think that the planning board at the time said, it might be easier to just do it as a standalone piece. That was the decision. I think, we could revisit that decision. I don't know,
Yeah,
Chad, if they've talked about it in your time on the, I don't see Chad right now.
Yeah, Chad's walked away.
I had to step out.
Another one of the reasons is that this only considers the commercial side of Bernardsville. Well, you have a whole residential side too that needs signs. So
yes,
I think that was another idea too.
That is absolutely correct. Your sign ordinance it applies to your entire community, and so I think the thought was that even though there are signs, signs related to this commercial area or downtown area, as we're calling it, having all of the standards in one place was desirable. But, from our standpoint, whatever the council decides on that is fine. In the original draft, we addressed signage. It really hasn't changed much. It's just that they've taken that language and are working to integrate that along with, as Councilman O'Day said, the process and procedures for signage and so forth. They're looking at all of that together. So, but either way, I mean, it could be in this, it could be part of the sign ordinance, but the content itself hasn't really changed.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, so the last slide here, and then I'll let Jeff chat a bit about the planning board's work. So from an architecture standpoint, just some of the highlights that I want to mention, buildings are intended to be oriented to the street. Okay, even if they have a little bit of parking in front of them, like they do in those two sub-districts, the buildings are oriented to the street. They're not inward facing. We do have standards for building materials. We also have design standards for windows and doors and so forth. We have dimensional standards for porches, stoops, bay windows, and other details, and also some guidance as to how to properly detail those things, because sometimes you can, it's just, you just don't get things that look like they have been there for a while. So there are things like that. And there are standards with roofs. With regard to landscaping and screening, as I mentioned, they're focused primarily on parking lot landscaping. So that is, having trees in the parking lot so that they're not all just pavement. But also when you do have instances, and you will have this, it's common in every community, instances where parking may be exposed to a street in a downtown and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, we can at least screen it with some sort of year-round screening, and there are a couple options for how you do that to help screen that from the street. And so when a pedestrian's walking by, they don't feel like they're just, walking right adjacent to a parking lot. There's some sort of definition there. And then finally, screening of outdoor equipment and, trash storage and things like that is also important. And those sort of standards are included in there. So anyway, I'm sorry, I probably ran a little bit long, but I just wanted you all to have a good understanding of this. And then Jeff, I don't know if you wanted to add anything about the planning board's review.
Chad addressed this a little bit at the beginning of the meeting, except I want to correct him. He said it was from the beginning of the year. I went back and looked at the agenda for planning board meetings, and the first time we took this up was September 9th, September 26th of last year. So the planning board spent almost a year looking at this proposed ordinance. And during that time, we looked not only at the larger issues, but at a lot of the more detailed issues. We spent time discussing how we're going to calculate setbacks, how we're going to calculate building heights. We talked about, we spent, as Chad mentioned, spent a lot of time talking about how we develop a standard for sidewalk width, particularly in the core district, to be sure that we had nice wide sidewalks in the future. You're making a plan here that's going to affect how the town looks, not so much tomorrow, but over the next 10 and 20 years. So the idea was, how do we make this town look attractive in a modern world? And the other thing that we changed a bit, was the permitted uses. There's not a huge change. The most significant changes are that under the current zoning, residential is prohibited in the old HD and office district, building district, OB districts, and limited to the floors above the first in the C1 and B1. The new plan would allow multifamily and townhouses throughout all 4 districts. Also, one of the things we looked at was restaurant use, and under the current ordinance, outdoor dining is a conditional use, which requires the restaurateur to go to the zoning board to get a variance to permit him to have outdoor dining. Under the new ordinance, it's permitted, provided that the restaurateur observes certain rules. And among those rules are that he can only have outdoor dining from Sunday night to Thursday night from until 10 p.m. and on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday to midnight. You might want to consider whether those hours need to be expanded to permit later use of outdoor restaurants throughout the business district. And we also took a look at a lot of the other details on use and fixed up things that weren't working as we intended.
I'm glad, this is Jeff Hammond. I'm glad you brought up the issue of time, and I hope we remember to come back to that, because that seemed a little overly restrictive if we're thinking about expanding the ability for people to do outdoor dining.
Yeah,
I mean, for example, we have one restaurant now that's open till 10. If we limit them on weekends, which includes Sunday, till 10, then that means that they wouldn't have dining even though their kitchen's still open.
Yeah, well, the nice thing about the COVID-19, if you can find any upside on that, is it's given us a lab on which to test outdoor dining, and I think it's worked out very well. So you might consider whether the hours we set for outdoor dining are too restrictive.
But to clarify, I think I read that it said Sunday to Wednesday was till 10 p.m. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday was till midnight.
Yes.
Yeah, didn't I say that?
You did say that, Jeff, but I think I heard Councilman Hammond say something else.
Well, I think
Right, no, you heard me right. But the thing is, if you're only allowed dining till 10, but your restaurant's kitchen is open till 10, which means really, essentially, your restaurant's open past that hour. People may come in at the 9:45. They wouldn't be able to be served if everything has to shut down at 10 o'clock. So,
so you're talking about the Sunday to Wednesday hours, Councilman Hammond.
Correct.
Yeah, and maybe if that was open to the restaurant's discretion, they may find nobody comes that late and close earlier anyway. But if you don't even give them that option.
Yeah, that would be right. That's their choice. And to Jeff Horowitz's point, let's think 10, 20, 30 years down the line, dining habits we're going to change probably, and things might stay open longer as we grow.
Yeah, that's a good point. The other thing, I think, Jeff, you mentioned, they now, under the new guidelines, don't have to go to the zoning board to get outside dining permits. It's simply, they go to Jeff Price.
Go Jeff Price, and as long as they're adhering the other restrictions on outdoor dining, like how far you can't block the sidewalk. You have to have barriers from traffic. You have to have, so it has to be safe. But as long as they're adhering to those other standards, there's no review required. The issue becomes if they violate those standards, it's an enforcement issue for Jeff Price.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm sorry, Matt. I'm planning on doing that. I'm creating a form for outdoor dining, which will include all the conditions that have to be met. And the restaurateur would still have to provide a plan. It can't be something written on the back of a beer mat. It has to be a signed document. And depending on the complexity, I may want the borough engineer to take a look at it. But all that's on a case-by-case basis.
And the police department and the health department.
Well, yes.
It seemed to me, though, when I was reading through some of the restrictions as far as outdoor dining were concerned, they seem reasonable, rational as they're laid out. But I don't think that some of the existing places that have cropped up as a result of COVID-19 would necessarily be allowed going forward. Is that correct in your impression, Jeff Price?
Yes, it is. Yeah, there are a couple of them that may have problems.
So I was just wondering if we need any more flexibility than what we have in the plan right now, just from what we've learned in the last 3-4 months. I'm just asking the question. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, right. The Berners Cafe is a bit of a problem. The coffee shop, I'm unsure whether he's doing his outdoor dining in a DOT right-of-way. I mean, that would all have to be flushed out. They would probably have to give their permission to let him continue doing his outdoor dining once the executive order expires.
When does that expire, Jeff? Is it October?
Well, I think when Jack wrote the special executive order that we put together, I think it expires in December, either the beginning or the end of December.
We waived enforcement to the end of the year. That's what we did.
Right.
That's right. I don't think outdoor dining is going to be much of an issue in December. So.
Yeah.
No. The question is just what we put into the new ordinance. That's all. Okay. I think we'll have to revisit the outdoor dining as we go through this discussion further.
Yeah.
So I had a question on a couple of the restrictions. So one was the gas stations were restricted to the gateway and the corridor, I think. So right now we have a gas station at in the core area. And so if they were to, like, what would cause a change in that gas station? Like, they couldn't, would it be the sale of it? Would it be
no, I think the gas station
anything about it?
I think that gas station use could continue indefinitely unless they made a major change in what they were doing at that site. Jack would probably
even if it's
Yeah, that's
sold to a
correct.
different party.
Any use that
Yes.
predates the change in zoning that makes it illegal can continue. They
Yes.
just can't expand or intensify the use without getting a variance.
Okay.
So-
And a sale wouldn't constitute
No,
that.
any land use runs with the land as
Okay,
opposed
got
to
it.
the
Okay.
people.
So it can remain a gas station, but if it was changed to a car wash, as an example, it could never go back to a gas station then.
That's right. If they abandon that use that's non-conforming, then they lose it. But abandonment is a complicated issue.
Okay.
And the other question I had was about the height of the buildings. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion around a building being put up where the balloons were flying. And so I'm wondering if with this ordinance, would that current how would that current application that's been in progress with the planning board be affected?
So I'm sorry, Councilwoman McCready, I agree with your question. I wanted to ask the same question myself. But Jack, I know this is in front of the Board of Adjustment at this time.
Yes.
Should we be specifically talking about the impact of this ordinance on that since it's in front of the board?
Yeah,
I'm just
kind
asking
of,
a question.
I hear
wanted to
you.
ask, I wanted to ask the exact same question as Councilwoman McCready, but before we go down that path, is it appropriate for us to do this?
No, not while it's pending before the Board of Adjustment.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I was trying to ask it in a more generic way, and I was trying to think about it for the last 5 or 6 slides since they talked about height, but I couldn't figure out a way to do it without calling that one out.
A generic answer is that the time of the application rule applies now. So anyone who has an application in prior to the adoption of this ordinance will be able to take advantage of the prior ordinance.
Well, what is it? There is a way to ask that.
I'm sorry, that was garbled.
Keith Covington, right? Make a generic statement that the ordinance that we're discussing has no impact on any buildings that are outside of the 4 subzones.
But it's in the zone.
Yeah, it's in the zone, isn't it? And yeah, I mean, and I'm honestly, I wasn't asking about that particular application. I was just wondering from the height, really, more so is like, because I remember seeing the balloons flying, but I don't remember exactly what the height was of that building that's being put up. So would it be higher than what's being currently proposed here? Mary Jane, I see you talking, but you're not.
I think if you look at that chart, Keith, could you flip back a couple of pages on your chart?
Yes, hold on just a second.
Yeah, I'm more curious about the height aspect really of it and how tall that.
Under the old guidelines, 3 stories was the limit. So if they're looking to do more than 3 stories, then they'd need a variance.
Yeah, and I that's really my question is I don't know, like those balloons were flying high, but I don't know what that equivalent is. Is that with that 3 stories or what's
proposing 3 or 4 stories? So
I think it doesn't apply is what Jack Pigeon told us though, because it's a time of application. So no matter what we do with this, it doesn't apply.
Yeah, I didn't really care.
Unless the new regulations are more liberal, in which case the applicant can take advantage of those.
Okay, can I ask a question of Keith Covington then? Are the new regulations more liberal than for that area, which is now downtown core? I'm sorry, can you go back 1 slide or 2, Keith?
Yes.
So this is a generic question. In the downtown core area, what are we allowing for height as compared to what we previously allowed for height in that, which I think was B1 before?
I think it's
yes, it's 3 stories is what we're allowing now. In the current ordinance, and Jeff, you correct me if I misspeak here. In the current ordinance, it's 2 stories or 3 stories if you have a mixed use building.
Right.
Or if you have residential on the top floor is the way it's written, I think.
Yeah, residential on upper floors or something like that.
Okay.
Then you're allowed.
So it's both 3 stories, but then if I remember the chart that you had shown on another page, 3 stories in B1 previously was 35 feet. 3 stories is now 45 feet.
That is correct.
What's the difference, and why would 3 stories be 35 in one ordinance and 40, 45 in another?
It's
Is it because of the facade style?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. I can't speak to, why the 30 to 35 feet, it's the way that it reads 30 feet. And I don't know if this is exactly the current ordinance language, but right now it says 30 feet slash 35 feet of upper stories residential. Well, we all know that, we're not going to get, 1 story in 5 feet. So I can't really speak to the current standard, but I can speak to the dimensions that we gave for the proposed standards. So one of the reasons why we have 40 feet is that we require in the core area, when you have a commercial use on the ground floor, to have a higher ceiling height on the ground floor, and then lower heights as you go up. And that's predominantly, if you think about, look at your own downtown, but think about any sort of, downtown Main Street building that you've seen before. Those ground floor commercial uses typically have a higher ceiling height. And so what we're trying to do is to accommodate that extra height that you typically see in a downtown. So that's why we have the 40 feet to an eave if you have a sloped roof, or 45 feet to the top of a parapet, because we're thinking that ground floor is going to be taller. It's required to be taller.
And I think that, ultimately we want the character of the building to be what we want it to be. If we force the buildings to be short and squat, we'll end up with short, squat buildings.
Exactly.
Because the builder will try to maximize their interior space, and you'll end up with just a bunch of flat buildings. So I think it makes sense to do it the way the new proposal says.
Yeah, and if you'll allow me to digress, although it is related for a minute, because this question has come up before, not only here. I mean, it came up in this particular ordinance, but it's come up in other places. Why do you do stories? Why do you measure in stories and number of feet? And for me, it's a personal thing, because as someone who has been, in my previous life, before I was a consultant, I worked in a planning department, and we developed a code, and we said, okay, the number of feet has to be 40 feet. And we said, the intent is for it to be 3 stories. But what happened was we had a developer come in and do every story, 9 feet or 8 foot ceilings or whatever. And they did exactly what you just said. They squished 4 stories into that 40 feet. And we were like, and the community was like, hey, I thought we said we wanted 3 stories. And so we had to go back and we said, okay, 3 stories in 40 feet. So since that time, I have been very adamant about, saying what you mean and mean what you say when it comes to building height. So that's why we measure in both. But we understand that buildings are different, and we understand that building program is different. So we have to build flexibility into that. I hope that helps provides a little perspective.
Yeah, no, it really actually does, because, I thought of this particular location because I read in the ordinance that the height of the building was measured from the adjacent sidewalk. And in that particular location, this sidewalk, and in many other locations, because we have a lot of hills and steep, walkways, that the sidewalk, but in that particular case, the sidewalk is really below the adjacent.
Yes.
So I was like, wow, if we measure from down there versus up here, and then I think about other, locations that are similar, where you measure from, I think is really important. So.
You're absolutely right. And just I'm going to really point out here that I sat in on some of those meetings that the planning board has. And I can assure you, from my perspective, this idea, this concern of where we measure height from, not just whether it's 3 stories or 40 feet or whatever, but where we measure it from, was something that was discussed and mulled over very much. And I think where it's landed in the ordinance, which is a slight tweak from what we originally had in there, is the result of that discussion, and precisely because what you just raised is a very, very good question, and the planning board really thought about that. I don't know.
In fact, I think I saw some wording in there, Keith, that talked about a slope and what you would do if you had a slope on the facade of the building and how you would measure it, and if there was a story that was partially exposed and partially underground. I think I saw wording in there, and I'm assuming that's what you're referring to when you say that was the result of these discussions.
Absolutely, because we talked about, when you're looking at the sidewalk and the site's going this, or let's say it's all flat across the sidewalk, but the site then slopes back that way, or whether it slopes up. We thought about all of these things. We talked about all these things. We talked about that even before the planning board, but the planning board got into it a little bit more. And I welcome Jeff to interject here if he wants to. But I think where we settled on is this sort of compromise. We didn't want a situation where, when you're looking dead on at the site and it's like this or like this, that we ended up with too much blank, foundation and essentially, higher building on one end. So there's maximum amount of exposed foundation. There's also opportunities though, when a site is sloping away, and you have a situation where you might have a walkout basement or something like that, that is permitted, but, you can only use that for storage. You're not going to get an extra story out of it or so forth. So, that's just, kind of scratching the surface on that. But I can assure you that this was a major point of discussion throughout the process and even into the planning board review as to how we measure that.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't see that part, Councilman O'Day, so I'll have to go back and take a look at for that.
Yeah, it's actually it's actually in the section on I think closer to the front. So you won't find it in the individual sections. You'll find it closer to the front of the ordinance where it says how do you measure height.
Okay.
So
great. Thank you.
And you have to look at the definitions too, because
absolutely.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'll take a look.
Jeff, I noticed that nothing changed in terms of sidewalk sales. That's still the same. Was there any discussion on that?
There was, and I think it changed in the detail, but not significantly.
Well, I had a question about that too. Thanks, Mayor, for bringing that up. But where did we come up with the limitation to 9 days?
I guess figuring once a month in the nice weather. So you'd probably leave out, December, January, and February probably.
But why would we prohibit? But if we have, for the sake of argument, 3 or 4 or 5 months of really nice weather, and we want people to be out walking, why would we not allow them to have it every weekend if that's what they desire?
Well, the sidewalk sales provisions, as the mayor pointed out, are substantially what was in the ordinance beforehand.
Yes.
And I think the thought process was that nobody had wasn't much complaint about it, and that you have to be a little careful, especially in the neighborhoods that have narrow sidewalks, that sidewalk sales don't overly obstruct the ability to get by on the sidewalks or force people to walk out in the street. And I think there's also a bit of a concern that if you overdo it, you stop looking like Bernardsville and you start looking like the Lower East Side.
Well, in terms of the width of the sidewalk and forcing people out on the street, you've got that covered, at least the way I read it, by the same way that you have the outdoor dining. There are provisions that says you have to have so many feet and has to be, not obstructing walkers or wheelchairs. I think it was 4 feet. There was. So wouldn't that handle that objection? And then sorry?
Jeff, the sidewalk sales provisions really don't go to the essence of what we were trying to accomplish with these zoning amendments. And if council believes that what has been in the law and what's incorporated in the new law too restrictive, we should fix that.
Well,
I think,
I recognize it.
If I might interject, sorry, Jeff.
Mm-hmm. That's okay.
Want to ask another question?
No, I was just going to say it has been a law, but I'm not sure it's a law that's worked really well to our advantage in this day and age. And, as we've said multiple times, we're planning for the future here now. And I think, I don't particularly think that sidewalk sales are a bad thing.
Maybe the thing to do is not have a limit, but have a process for applying, so that at some point, if it's getting to be too many, you can just not approve the next one.
Yeah, this
But we
is
have to give some guidance.
sidewalk sales are through an application to the clerk. So Anthony typically takes care of any sidewalk sales. Now there's new relaxation that allows sidewalk sales like outdoor dining. It can happen anytime until this executive order is extinguished.
So what I would say is that when I was on the planning board, this actually came up. The sidewalk sale discussion came up, and I think that the concern is as much about the aesthetic that it would provide if we had 365 days a year of sidewalk sales. Is that the aesthetic that we want? And that was where we focused the discussion. When I was on the planning board, it was more about that. It wasn't so much about how much room is there to pass by, although that was a consideration. It was more about, do we want that look for our downtown? Is that consistent with what we're going for in this overall, redesign of what the zoning districts are going to be, and the new signage ordinance, facades and things? Are sidewalk sales consistent with the look and feel of our walkable downtown? And I think that's where the planning board, in my tenure on the planning board, came down on the side of maybe, we haven't got a lot of complaints from vendors, from retailers at this time. If it's not broken, let's not fix it. That was the discussion at the time I was on the planning board.
I think that's a fair summary.
Yeah. And so an individual store can do their own sidewalk sale. It's not a town-wide one necessarily. Is that how it works?
But that's not what the ordinance says. The ordinance still doesn't make, at least unless I misunderstood it, the ordinance doesn't say that this is a town-wide sidewalk sale. No. It just says that a vendor is limited to 9 times a year.
Right. But we have in the past, the chamber will pick a day and they'll do a town-wide one.
But let's just say that, thinking ahead, we expand our sounds around town. We have art walks and we have other outdoor activities. We could very well end up with, and then you add in the major holidays, Memorial Day, 4th of July, things like that. We're going to end up with more than 9 days when vendors may want to have some of their wares out on the street and attract people to come into their stores.
Well, what if we said 9 days above and beyond council approved events, and then the council can approve as many events as is deemed appropriate? So if it's a council condoned event, it doesn't count against your 9. What if we put that wording in?
Oh, if it's in conjunction with.
Right. So if it's in conjunction with a downtown activity, yep. We can have an actual council resolution on a case-by-case basis. There's the Memorial Day sidewalk sale is happening, and we can vote that one through, and then it doesn't count against anybody's 9 then. And so you can still have your 9 on other days, not, above and beyond the council approved ones. I wonder if that gets to Dr. Hammond's point of, if we have more we have a Christmas market or a holiday, let's call it a winter holiday market that lasts for a week, and that takes up 7 days. Those 7 don't count towards your 9,
Right. Yeah.
I think that's a nice solution. That's a good compromise. I think we want to encourage, or at least we want to assist our retail as much as possible. And I just found the 9 days to be rather restrictive.
Yeah, I don't think it should be days. It should be so many times a year. It could be 10 times a year, 12 times a year. It may be a 3-day event, but it should be events as opposed to days.
Well, then you're still limiting it, though. I think if it was an individual one, there should be a limit. But if you're doing it in conjunction with an event, there would not be a limit.
Yeah. So I think if we just put in the wording that says, leave the 9, leave all that wording and say, and just add one sentence that says, council approved events, that involve some wording that Jack Pigeon could come up with, or somebody, John Zabo, council approved events do not count against your 9. That's all that we need to say, I think, and then we can approve 1 event a year or 10 events a year. And those 10 events could last 3 days. One of the 10 events could last 3 days. It could be Memorial Day from Friday to Sunday, or actually it would be Saturday to Monday, but.
Yeah.
Okay.
We good with that? Is everybody okay with that?
So is John Zabo the right person to make that change?
To just change the
Yeah,
word?
John's probably the right person.
Yeah, just to add that sentence that, any council-approved community events, don't count
Yeah,
against 9.
I can do that. It's not really a planning question.
No, okay,
So I'll
excellent.
put something together for our meeting.
Thank you.
And should we update the number of events to Jeff's points versus number of days? So like if they wanted to do something, Saturday and Sunday on a particular weekend, that's considered one event rather than 2 days?
What if they want to do it from June 1st to August 31st?
Yeah, I prefer the days. The days are definable. Events are nebulous. If 9 isn't enough, we can make it 12 someday down the road. But I think we leave it at days, not events. Events is too nebulous.
I agree.
Okay, all right.
It would be based on their application, but okay,
Yeah.
I hear you.
Yeah, okay, thanks. All right, that's on that.
So, okay.
The other issue is the dining hours. Do we want to make a change in that?
I would at least extend it to 10:30. We have as I said, we at least have 1 restaurant that's open till 10 as it is. You want to allow people to not to have to be booted out at the last minute.
I'm okay with 10:30.
And you may find that other restaurants in the future want to go till 10. As we make the downtown more robust, let's make it friendly.
Yeah.
Is midnight too early on Saturdays and Sundays, on Fridays and Saturdays, Thursdays, Fridays and Saturdays?
I don't think for
I can hear you.
Yeah, for outside, I think midnight is good. Anybody else have an opinion?
I'm okay with midnight.
I'm not sure how long people stay open, to Jeff's point earlier, as it is.
Yeah.
I think, the only debate about this is, we don't want to get in people's way, you know what I mean? And that's kind of what we took with the whole COVID thing, but
Yeah.
I think midnight seems okay.
Yeah. You think about noise too, for people that are living closer to these places as well.
Yeah. Or they
stay open.
Upstairs. Yeah.
I'd make it 11 then, if that's your real concern. But I do think it needs to be some longer than 10.
No, we were talking about the weekend one is midnight. Is that, you think, what Jeff Horowitz was asking is, is that too early, midnight on the weekends? But I think that's plenty, although, hopefully, they're not allowed to have outside. You can have somebody playing a guitar, but no amplifiers or any of that kind of thing. So,
There's separately, there's information about noise that is separate.
yeah,
So,
but some have had outside performers, playing a guitar or something, but there's a sound level and there's I think you can't have anything that amplifies the sound.
Yeah, there's this, you're right, the mayor, there's a 60 decibel sound level.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, I think it's 65 up until a certain time, and then 50, right. And then 50 after that time. Is that right? In 12.11. And I was going to ask the question, it says 65 decibels and it also says 50 decibels, but it doesn't say where it's measured from. And this is the same problem as where if you measure it next to the person who's singing, that could be 50 decibels is like a speaking voice.
It's typically measured at the property line.
Right. So I think we should specifically say as measured at the property line. Because if we say 50 decibels and just leave it without saying where we're measuring that noise level, it seems to me it would be unenforceable, and it would also, or unenforceable, or it would just basically say nobody can say anything, because 50 decibels is literally like a conversational sound level. So you couldn't have any singing at all then, is all I'm saying, if you're measuring it right from where the person is singing. It has to be.
Yeah, I think that specificity would be helpful to make it enforceable.
Yeah, So as measured at the property line.
Okay, Jack, can you just add that too?
Will do.
Okay. And we changed 10:30. Did we say 10:30 weeknights?
I have another question.
Jeff, you're not coming through well. You sound like you're underwater.
Are you talking to this Jeff or
Jeff Hammond.
which Jeff are we talking to?
Jeff Hammond. We couldn't hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you? I don't know if you can hear me now, but
Yeah.
We could pick whatever the group wants, 10:30 or 11. I think we just have to be beyond 10.
I'm happy with 10:30.
You know, we haven't, John Donahue, you're here? Yes. What do you think? I haven't heard from you. Where's John? I know he was having trouble with his video. No?
You know, the problem with 10 or even 10:30 is if somebody comes in and sits down for dinner at 9 o'clock, which is not a particularly late hour for dining, especially, it could take them more than an hour and a half to finish a meal. So, you know, when you pick the time to cut it off, you should be thinking of the time that people will be coming in and sitting down for dinner, so that you don't have a situation where just as the guy's finishing up his souffle, they have to pick it up and take it inside.
Yeah, you actually expressed that better than I did. You were more articulate. That's what I was trying to get across. So, let me just make a proposal. Let's just, because 10:30 is kind of a cumbersome time. Make it 11 o'clock, and that's my proposal.
Well, is that 11 o'clock the restaurant closes? So that's
well, no, the outdoor dining. For all I know, the restaurant could stay open till midnight if in the future we were able to support that. But
right.
I think we're talking about outdoor dining here now.
So they would have to just figure out when they take their last customer.
Just take their last order. Yes.
Sit down.
I think 11 sounds, it's arbitrary, but I think 11 sounds like a reasonable hour, given, weekends people eat dinner late, but even during the week people eat really late.
Yep.
You also have to consider that there are residential aspects to this. You've got residents across the street, you've got residents upstairs. So you have to take into consideration their life.
What is the current time right now?
For outdoor dining, it's 10 o'clock.
Well, every day?
Well,
yeah.
Does outdoor dining end at 10, or they're just music ends at 10?
Well, I mean, we weren't that specific in this relaxation of our ordinances.
No, currently, Jeff, currently it ends at 10?
For outdoor dining, yes.
And so even if they don't have music, you still have people sitting outside talking and laughing and yeah. So if there's people upstairs, that's a good point.
Yeah, the ordinance currently says no use of the dining area after 10 o'clock is permitted.
I'm trying to think which restaurants have outside dining.
I mean, Station now, Bistro, Claremont.
Yeah, the station does have people upstairs, but they've been open inside till midnight, right? And people live right above them.
I mean, even after midnight.
Yeah.
Yeah, Claremont Tavern, they've got residences across the street.
It doesn't seem to be a problem in other municipalities that have late night.
Here you go, Ken. Actually, Claremont's got theirs in the back, so they're not really affecting the people across the street, but there's people that live behind them.
Behind there, right?
Yeah.
Right, it's just the leaving at night that I get the complaints.
Well,
Jack, do we have to settle this now, or is this the type of thing that we could, if we leave it as it is, but then when it comes up on the next council meeting for definitive vote, and we get feedback from people that they would like it at 10 or later, would we be able, is that a substantive change? Can we change it then?
I think that probably is a substantive change, which would require us to amend the ordinance and then continue the public hearing on the ordinance as amended.
So we have to decide, we should decide tonight then.
Well, you can decide at introduction. Are we introducing tonight?
I thought that's what we were.
It's on the agenda if we feel comfortable with
Right.
it.
So if you're introducing tonight, yes, you should. But if we're introducing at our next meeting, then you can do it that evening.
Well, if we introduce it tonight, then when will we have our public hearing?
Well, as I said, the planning board is scheduling meetings so that they can re-examine the master plan. So Anthony won't have to give notice to all properties within 200 feet of any of the zone changes. So I'm not sure it's urgent that it be introduced this evening.
So if we introduce it on the 14th, that would give us some time to talk to the restaurants and see if they, what their preference is, or if they're getting complaints or whatever.
I think, Mayor, that's a good approach. I'm just also trying to weigh this against, this is a long-term plan. So it's true that the restaurants may give us feedback saying, yeah, 10 o'clock's fine, or whatever, 10:30. But then, if we are successful, like I believe we can be with our downtown revitalization, is that really predictive of what Bernardsville might be like in 5 years or 10 years? That's all I'm thinking.
Well, we always have the opportunity to amend the ordinance at some point in the future.
Is that right?
Yes.
I mean, we can amend the ordinance?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you could adopt the ordinance as written, and in 3 months go back and see what's working and what's not working, and make some minor amendments.
Yeah.
In that case, my thought would be then we should be more flexible, and if it's a problem for people, then we can always make it more restrictive. I'd err on the side of trying to be restaurant friendly. I think
So go to 11. You think?
Well, I mean, if we're saying we can amend it if there's issues,
Right.
either way, we can amend it up, we can amend it down.
Yep. Anyone else?
Well, if you look at it that way, you really want to think about going to 1 a.m. at least on Friday and Saturday.
You're really pushing this, Jeff.
Well, no, I'm just saying that if, given Tom's perspective, I'm sorry, Councilman O'Day's perspective, and I'm not at that age anymore, but young people stay out late.
Yeah. And it does allow the restaurant the option to close earlier if they want.
Yes.
They don't have to stay open till 1 if they, don't have the customers or don't have the business or don't have the staff.
Right. I mean, that's my point of government getting in the way of business. I mean, I'm erring on the side of trying to be business friendly is what I'm thinking. We need to balance that against being resident friendly. I understand that too. So
yeah.
They're both important.
So,
Yeah,
it also might.
Oh, Christine, I hear you.
Yeah, it also might be a good question to get some feedback from the police department, because they're the ones that probably get these types of complaints about noise at night. So maybe we get their input and feedback as well.
Do we have restrictions from a borough perspective with regards to hours for restaurants?
I believe there's hours for serving liquor. I don't know how that relates to hours to actually close the establishment. That is a police matter.
It does sound like we have a few questions that we probably ought to resolve, so I'm not sure we should introduce this tonight. And then we give us a chance to sort out those questions. I applaud Jeff Horowitz's eagerness to make this 1 a.m. I guess that makes me feel like a real old fogey, but I think 11 or midnight would be good, and then you could always backtrack. But I think when you think about how we've discussed this over the last year, what's one of the key words that we continue to use?
We lost you again.
You're all garbled again.
Describe what our vision for downtown is. We want to attract people, and we want to attract we want young families, and we want to have a vibrant. That's the key word, a vibrant downtown. I don't think we get that with a 10 o'clock ending time.
Yeah. I mean, and for me, I just think it's, we're kind of arbitrarily, I mean, I know it's not arbitrary because we're trying to balance residents versus business, but I just feel like, I mean, yeah, that's why I asked about when it closes, because would it just be, say when the business closes that, it's up to the hours of the businesses. But I mean, obviously if they're open-ended, then that's a different story. But if we have an ordinance related to when businesses can be open, then we could kind of marry the two together and make it consistent.
I just have a couple.
Sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just have a couple of questions on page 6 and 7. And the one on page 6 is related to non-conformities. Maybe Jack can answer this, but if you
sorry,
look at this
Jeff, pause for 1 second.
Yeah.
Anthony, can we take down the big screen with the picture now and go to the page that Jeff's talking about? Page 6.
Actually, that would be Keith. I don't know if I have control over that because Keith shares that.
Keith, are you still on?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm here. Let me stop sharing. The only
Now, can we show the page that Jeff Price is talking to?
I can get that up there. Hang on. Let me just find it though.
You know what? I said I have it up if you want me to share it.
Okay. If that's easier, I can make you a co-host. If that's easier, let me do that. Okay. Go.
What is referring to is some lots will now become non-conforming, and we've just been through this whole non-conforming 2-family, single family that was done in 1960.
You're saying page 6.
Yeah, page 6. I don't see what you're.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's up there either.
Are you referring to page number 6 on the ordinance itself, or page 6 in the agenda packet?
Oh, maybe it's here. Where's I don't see non-conforming anywhere.
Yeah, it's at the bottom of page 6.
Applicability of regulations.
Oh, okay, I see.
Okay, existing developments, any existing use, lot, building, or structure, that paragraph there. So now in the map that was up before, where it showed the new lines for the zones, and this is just one example, it took the library out of the B1 zone. The library now becomes part of R4 or maybe R5. I don't know which. So that is a residential zone, and all the businesses that are in the library would become non-conforming. The same at the end of Mine Brook, where you now have a lot of residences that now become part of the DC zone. So they would become, I don't know whether they become non-conforming, but my question is, would all these people need to come to the zoning officer within the first 12 months of this zoning change? Or are we going to be sending people to the Board of Adjustment after 12 months?
If they want a certificate of nonconformity, then yes, they need to go to the zoning officer within those first 12 months.
Okay, so how do we tell them this?
Well, I think that's a good point. We don't want people coming in at 13 months and having to go to the Board of Adjustment.
Can we as a council send each of these affected parties a letter specifically?
Absolutely.
Well, we should, at a minimum, we should do that.
Yeah, but we need to identify them so we know which ones they are, which would have to be Jeff, right?
Well, I mean, I think I would like to understand a little bit more about why we did that and what's there today before we.
Yeah, because I mean, if I'm a resident in one of these houses, and next door, my neighbor who was previously a resident sells and now a nail salon moves in, is that possible?
But the other issue Mr. O'Day, is that if you're one of those residences and you want to put an addition out back, you're going to have to go to the Board of Adjustment to get a use variance because you're not conforming use and you can't expand that use without getting a variance.
Well, why don't we just leave the residents out of this? It's supposed to be for downtown anyway. Why are we capturing? There's only looks like there's 6 or 7 residential properties right now that are inside that dotted black line. Why don't we just draw the line not where they are?
And if we're redrawing the line, why is the library in the residential area? It's right. J is contiguous with the business area.
I don't know.
The lower level is
the library. The library is not in this.
Why not?
Well, the boundary just went short of the library. I guess the assumption was that it was a civic use, and so
the bottom floor of the library is a commercial rental, and some borough use, both.
I understand that. I've actually been to meetings there. The best answer that I have for you is that it was just simply determined that it was not. But is it okay? Bear with me just a second, because I
have a question for Jeff Price. Existing non-conforming use of the library. We own the library. I mean, is it even an issue, Jeff, for the library?
Well, I just use that because it sticks out like a sore thumb. But there are other residences that would fall into that category of.
Yeah, I'm more worried about the other residences. The library, because we own it, is not that big a deal.
Well, as a practical matter, no tenant in the library is going to expand or intensify its use. So as a practical matter, being a non-conforming use is not going to affect the library building.
Yeah, I'm not worried about the library. I'm more worried about the residences that are captured by the black dotted line, as Councilwoman McCready, I think, originally pointed out.
Where are they? Along Claremont and on 202?
They're south on 202.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking. Maybe we need to walk it, and we need like because I mean, looking at the pictures and the dotted line, it looked like it was going to like Claremont and the Bearded Dragon. So that kind of made sense to me on that side of the road. But like behind the library, I never would have picked up on if Jeff didn't mention it.
Well,
never would have picked up on.
The only thing I would say though is I think the original black dotted line captured the currently existing business zones, various different business zones that we had, didn't they, Keith? Like we didn't make that black dotted line go further south on 202 or further up Claremont. We just took what was already some type of business zone and we renamed it a different type of business zone. So these residences were already in a business zone.
As far as the ones that are B1, yes.
Like down by Woodland, for examel.
Well, they were those were in the R4 zone.
That's correct. Once you go west of Woodland, those properties are in the R4 zone. So that is correct. But yeah, and the library is in B1. I'm not entirely sure why that particular use was taken out, other than the fact that what I've already said, that it was a civic type use, even though it does have some commercial use in it.
Jeff, Keith, stop me if I'm wrong, but I'm looking at the map and it looks to me like the entire, call it the east side of Claremont, is either Claremont zone or downtown core zone. I'm not seeing that the library is rezoned to residential.
Is there a way we can just do an overlay, like an overlay of existing with, and then?
Well, yeah. Actually, let's do this. Can I share again real quick?
Yep, I think you can.
I'm going to share. All right, hold on a second.
Well, okay. Why would we go past Woodland anyway? What's beyond Woodland other than the firehouse?
The stuff on the other side of
dry
cleaners, the
that little building there with the blowout place. Yeah.
So let's look at the library first, because I'm a little bit.
Yeah, I have to apologize because the map that I have from Zabo's office doesn't look like this map.
This
The
looks
map
like
I
the
have
library's in it.
has the library cut out of it.
The library was in there.
See,
Yeah, so you can see there that the library, which is right here, if you can see my cursor, is not in there, but it is certainly B1. To be honest, unless it was an oversight, I'm not sure why that isn't part of the core. So, I mean, it would, that's the only thing. I'm kind of at a loss as you all, other than the fact that is more of a civic type use. So I mean, I think that could be part of that, only because it's B1, and if B1 goes away, you'd have to come up with something else. So, yeah, I don't have a good answer for you on that. As far as the properties to the west of Woodland, that came out of discussions with the downtown committee. Jeff, I don't know if you can add anything to that discussion. I just know that there was some concern about what was happening on the south side of Mine Brook Road, and that's what sort of generated, capturing both sides of the street.
Right, and there's already a potential commercial use on the corner. Hey, could you put that back?
Oh, sorry.
It's already it's hard enough to keep these things in mind when we have the map in front of you, let alone.
Yeah.
There's already a potential commercial use on the corner of Woodland and 202, where the old drive-in.
Yeah.
And there are commercial uses on the
other side,
on the railroad side of 202. And I think the thought process was that the other side was potentially attractive as commercial as you entered the town from the south side.
But right now it's residential. There's like 4 or 5 houses there.
Yeah, it's probably as many houses if you blow that up as you can see lot lines there.
Can you go back to the prior version, because it's hard to tell on the existing zoning I'm saying now?
Yes. There you go.
So where's Woodland? Can you put your cursor on Woodland here?
Can you see it?
On the D of Road. Yeah.
So the B1 is the beige area. It doesn't go into the darker brown. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct.
Oh, okay. So I was looking at the black line as the prior, but this is the overlay that Councilwoman McCready was talking to.
That is correct.
This is the overlay. The black shows the new area, and the color coding is what it used to be.
Yes, the problem, as I pointed out a minute ago, is not as much in this area. That is consistent. What I'm at a bit of a loss is why the library property is not in there. I don't know if that was just a drawing of the line mistake, because everything else that's B1 is in there except for this piece. But this right here is that's consistent with what you've got there.
Well, I think what we should do is, before our September 14th meeting, we should send a letter to anybody who was previously in an R4 that's now going to be in a business district, and have them come to the meeting, and we can hear what they have to say.
What about those 2 lots by the OB zone down by North Finley? You got 2 yellow lots there going up Finley or Childs.
But isn't that where the utility properties are?
Where like these?
Yeah, those 2 guys.
Yeah, that's a like a substation, electric substation, or some sort of utility. So it was not included in that.
So they'll be in residential zone in the future?
Well, they will. Yeah, I mean, they'd have to go to something. But at the same time, you know, the I mean, they're likely not going to change because it's a utility. It's not probably site, it would not be developed.
Both of those two properties.
Yes.
But they have to be something.
They do have to be something.
Mm-hmm. And the same with the Ammerman lot. So the Ammerman parking lot now is part of the commercial district. So I don't know whether you want to notify people that are surrounding that Ammerman lot that that's becoming commercial.
Oh, is that this?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the town, the borough owns that, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
So Jack Pigeon, a question for you.
Sure.
Regardless of what zone is in there, and this is a borough owns that Ammerman lot, can we put stuff on there that's not within the residential or business, regardless of what it's actually zoned on a map? Can we do what we want with that property?
To a certain extent, yes. If we use it for a non-public purpose per se, we could do an overlay zoning ordinance on there.
I also think that the
what does that mean? Can you explain that in English, non-legal English?
Well, I don't know. I don't think we've discussed publicly the possible use of the Ammerman lot. So I'm just reluctant to discuss it. That's why it was somewhat vague.
Okay, but before we
so
another clarification before we go too far down the line, can I go back to the question that Jeff Price raised? What, or maybe Tom O'Day, one or the other. But what happens to those residential homes west of Woodland that are currently residential, but will become business? What are the ramifications for those homeowners? That means they have to comply with the new zoning ordinance if they wanted to fix up their home. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. No, not necessarily. Yeah, I mean, if they're if they made a substantial addition to the home that met the criteria in the ordinance, which, you know, it would face the street, it increased the floor area by a certain percentage. I can't recall right at this moment what that is. The existing floor area. Then the addition would have to comply, but it's unlikely that a residential structure, you know, the simple sort of things that you would typically do to a residence would conflict with this.
Well, let me give you a scenario that would be typical. That they want to put siding on their home and change the windows. And so they're going to be redoing 20 windows and residing the entire house. Now, would that mean that they have to comply with the streetscape requirements of the commercial zone?
No. If they were replacing windows, if they were replacing those windows in kind, then they would not have to comply. If they, let's say they tore windows out and like rearrange the windows, which is highly unlikely, but let's say that they wanted to do that, then those windows would have to comply with the ordinance. So again, when you're talking about modifications to a building, such as that example, it's the element itself that has to comply, not everything, you know, related to the building and so forth. Does that help?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
My question: what happens when they want to sell that house? Do they have to go through that non-conforming thing, like we? Or
well, that's why Jeff's suggestion that we put people on notice that if their property is being rezoned from residential to commercial, they ought to go to the zoning officer within 12 months of adoption of the ordinance and get a certificate of non-conforming use, so that they don't have to worry about it in the future. Because any buyer is going to require that.
If they don't do that, and then in 3 years they sell their house, they'd have to go to the Board of Adjustment.
Go to the board,
yes. Now, the one difference with all the ones we've been dealing with over the last year or two is that it would be fairly easy for them to prove to the Board of Adjustment to meet their burden of proof that it was in fact a residential use prior to the adoption of this ordinance.
Yeah.
In fact, we could document those houses as in our Jeff Price's records. We
Yes.
could document them as residential properties ourselves, which would help somebody in the Board of Adjustment in the future because the records would be held by our own office.
Yes, but it would certainly behoove them to do it now to avoid the expense of going to the Board of Adjustment.
It's really making sure they do it within the first year.
That's the best route, but even as a backup, we could document them for ourselves. It just wouldn't take that long, and we should do it as a responsible government, I think.
Agreed.
Is there a cost to that? Is there a cost for them to come to you, Jeff Price, to get that letter of nonconformity?
Not within the first 12 months, no.
No.
Okay.
I mean,
That's
can
good.
I ask
So then
why?
it's really not it's really not burdensome then.
No.
No, but like, why even include them in the zoning then? Kind of just is like defeats the purpose, right? If we're never going to make them change out of R4, what's the point of including them in this new ordinance?
Conceivably, somebody might buy one of those houses and want to have a business in it.
Yeah.
I think what we're doing
is commercial.
It's more future oriented, that if somebody might want to buy up 3 of those houses and put in a senior housing building or something.
Yeah, or even like a mixed use, you know, it probably increases the value of those properties.
Yeah,
I would think.
But we're not exempting them from this ordinance. It's state law. It's under the MLU, or they would become a non-conforming use and have the right to continue that use.
Okay, so
it gives them options. It doesn't force them to become business, but it gives them the option to if they want to.
Right, but it's not this ordinance that's allowing them to continue the non-conforming use. They have that right under the municipal land use law.
Okay, got it. So where is this that it's actually what are the current, I'm trying to picture where this is and I can't see the road names there. But so what is like ending in the blue? Is that like where right before the firehouse?
I think the larger lot in the brown is the firehouse.
The firehouse is bear with me just a second. Crap. All right, here we go. The firehouse is in this brown right here, if you can see my cursor. Okay. Yep. And from that point forward, everything is, some sort of commercial type use. Okay. On the other side of the street, and again, I think is all houses. And I think that just to add to what others have said, I think the thinking of the downtown committee was that, because the south side of the street is commercial and then gets to the kind of the civic core, where the Borough Hall is and so forth, having that on the other side of the street to match up just in terms of, connections and so forth is what drove that.
Okay. And so then just out of curiosity, why is it that the parking lot was not included in, and it just stopped at that house?
That's a great question. I actually recall a little bit of this conversation with the downtown committee. I think the concern was that, if they took it farther down Mine Brook Road, it was kind of one of these things where, all right, so at what point do you capture the other side? And do we really want the quote unquote downtown district to extend that much farther west?
When you get down to that area, Councilwoman, you're starting to get to the glitter farm. So the idea was that was not appropriate for commercial development on either side of the street.
No, the glitter farm is way down. Well, this is just the
other side.
There's still houses all the way up until that rock, where we kind of store things, and then the across from the Rose Bowl is still a long way.
I-2 is where the storage place is, right? Can you see that down there?
Where?
No, I-2, the quarry, you mean?
Yeah, I-2 is the light industrial zone.
But I thought this is where the municipal building was. I thought this ended at the firehouse right here, which means the municipal building and Nervine Park still continue all the way down.
Yes, you are correct.
So, but when you get here, you get Irvine Park, you're getting the glitter factory. So this is more, was undeveloped property, and we thought that was far enough for commercial.
I'm not sure that's correct. I think
No.
Councilwoman McCready's correct. I think if you want, because don't forget, down there's also across from the Rose Bowl, there's that medical office building, Dr. Sinatra's building,
Right.
and there's an ophthalmologist there. So there is other commercial stuff that far down there.
Yeah, there's a bunch of multifamily homes and single family homes that continue across from the municipal building until that empty lot next to that medical building. So I was just wondering why we stopped and there's this big open lot that's there, but we didn't include it in this. I think it's owned by the firehouse, actually.
The lot's owned by the fire department, and I think we own the little piece behind it, I think.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I was
just go ahead, Keith.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, again, you know, there was a lot of conversation about this, and you know, was there the idea of creating some sort of transition into the core area? And you know, I think this line changed a little bit throughout the process, but I think we landed on this location as the point at which you know, development, you know, again, you know, touching the civic uses that are on that southern side of 202, you know, at the point at which we could see in the future a transition to more of this downtown character. And so I think that's why that line was drawn there. Now, I just want to say one other thing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I did not go back and look at the R4 district, but R4 is one of your denser residential districts. Isn't that correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
R5 is the most dense and R4 is the next.
And so I think there was some thought that it made sense for this to transition over time to that more downtown character, because it was, you know, although those houses there are single family today, maybe in the future they aren't single family. And so I think the thought was that was more appropriate. You know, if that was R1, all of this was R1, it might be a tougher decision for the downtown committee. But I think they kind of settled on this because you're connecting to this. You're not going too far down the road with this downtown core area, but you're capturing a number of properties here, particularly on the north side, that are currently single family, but could easily transition to something more intense over time.
And conversely, just while you're in that area, you're removing 2 lots that were in the commercial zone and you're putting them in the R4.
Which 2?
The 2 that are on the downside of the black line.
Down here?
There, right there. That one and that one.
What are they? Do you know?
I personally, I don't know what's going on there, but they think they're commercial.
Okay. Well, they're zoned C1, and you know, I think the main reason why they were not included in the downtown district is because, number one, they don't front Mine Brook, and they're also on the other side of the train tracks. This one back up here, the parking lot, since the borough owned that and it was so close to downtown, even though it's on the other side of the tracks, it felt like it was appropriate to include. But I think these 2 parcels over here, these blue ones that you're talking about that are C1, they're not really part of downtown. And so I think that's why they're excluded.
What's on there now?
Let me see here. What is on there now?
Is that where the?
That's got to be like. Sorry.
Is that where the utility substation is?
I'm trying to.
Behind MJ Neal.
Hold on.
Yeah, I think you might be right, Jeff.
Yes, that's what it is. It's kind of, it's actually a portion of it is actually wooded. That I'm looking at. You guys can't see it, I don't think, on my screen, but I'm looking at Google Earth right now. You know, it's, oh, well, and also a portion of it is Mine Brook. So that's where we're seeing the trees and so forth through there. A lot of this area in here is the Mine Brook. So there's not much development, if any, on those two parcels currently.
That's what I mean by about walking around and seeing what this is, because it's really hard to picture. I mean, and if you go along with, I didn't even actually notice that, Jeff, but if you go along those same things with the back end on the right side, where if we go back to that last, if we go back to the last one.
Yeah, hold on just one second, Council Lady. I will definitely do that. This one overlays on top of the aerial. So yeah, can I just point that out? In the previous slide, those are the parcels that are blue, and you can see there's a tank on there and then green. So part of that site, part of that. Okay, I don't know why that just went away. Oh, technology. All right, let's see here. Let me go back here. There is some tank-like structures on this parcel, and this is part of Mine Brook here. So it's there. So if I go back to the one, Council A, that you wanted me to go to there, and we look at that same area, so that's it. So that one parcel, there's some tanks on this one, and on this parcel, it's really Mine Brook that's coming through there.
Yeah. So
not the road, but the actual stream.
Yeah. I mean, we do have some pieces in the, like to the left of that, where the blue and brown are excluded as well. But then what I was going to point out before is to the right of Mount Airy Road, you see that this is kind of like this small little line, which I didn't notice before Jeff pointed out the other one, is that this whole thing cuts off the whole back. Is that the whole back cutting off like the train tracks area? Like what is that?
Yeah. So and I hope I'm understanding your question because I think it's a good one. The weird thing for me is that on your zoning boundaries, your zoning boundaries don't really respect right of way. They're just kind of colors across the map. So you know, a lot of what you're seeing here as this brown and this light blue and green and so forth along here, that's all New Jersey Transit right of way. Mm-hmm. So and that's where those railroad tracks are. Normally you wouldn't zone what's in the public right of way, but you know, it is what it is. So it's a little bit confusing.
Okay.
But you do. So you have that. But this little leg of brown that extends back to this green here, that is actually the lot line of that parking lot.
It's just a funky design of the Ammerman lot. That's all borough property, Councilwoman McCready.
Yeah, and I do recall way back when you were first here, Keith, you did walk all of this on foot.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Even parts of it that aren't included. I walked this entire area back over here and so forth. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, you know, I just want to know what we are approving, right? I mean, so I realize Keith walked it, but you know, we're the council people, so we should know exactly what we're rezoning and what we're not. So I think, like I said earlier, I think it would be good if we walked it, but
that's why we pay professionals.
Yeah, but they don't know our borough, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Well, so
you walked it with the committee, didn't you? Walk with the committee members?
Well, some of them, yes. I mean, we didn't walk every square inch of the area with the committee. I pretty much walked this entire area myself, and I will say that you know, there are some oddities that you all have pointed out. But and the boundary itself was a collaboration between myself and the downtown committee, but primarily being driven by the downtown committee. Where it gets crazy and weird is really along Mine Brook in this area, and I say just in general, just the way the properties are aligned and so forth. But the general rule of thumb, if you look across this and try not to think too much about, the individual properties, we tried to capture properties that had frontage on these major roads that were part of this. So that is why, for instance, we might draw a dashed line here that captures, a portion of the train property, but doesn't capture the tanks here, because there's really, it's landlocked. There's no way to access it, unless you access it through this property. So, obviously I don't know all of the details in terms of, how properties are configured, but I feel confident that we really thought long and hard about what's in and what's not in. That being said, I welcome anyone to, raise questions like you have and poke holes in it. If you feel like something needs to be addressed, we will, do whatever we can to do that.
Right, because I'm looking at it from the property owner of that particular lot you're talking about with the oil tanks on it. He should get a letter saying you're no longer in the commercial zone. You are now in the R4 zone. And when you come to sell this in a few years' time, you may have a problem.
Now, they wouldn't have a problem if they get that letter of pre-existing use, though, would they, Jeff?
No, but if he decides to retire and what happens to it? Maybe nothing happens to it. I'm just being not overcautious, but
I would tell him with the ramifications, but I would also tell him the remedy. So I would just say that you could avoid any future problems by this easy step, which will cost you nothing.
But remember, they can't expand.
You can't expand or change the use. I guess that would be the only problem. I think what we ought to do is send a letter to the people, the residents that are changing to commercial, the commercial that are going to change to residential, and send a letter. Come to the meeting, on September 14th if you want to express any concerns. And if we don't hear any concerns, we can move ahead.
Well, I'd say more rather than express concerns, to understand how this will impact the property, a little more positive.
Sure, I think that's fine. I agree. But let's notify them. It's kind of, it's beyond what we're required to do, but it makes sense for us to do it.
Yeah.
But I think it's a must do, in my opinion. It's the right thing to do.
Yeah. I agree.
So Mayor, are we going to direct Anthony to send those letters?
Well, I guess Jeff maybe could identify them. Can you identify them for us?
I'll identify the lots and blocks and property owners, yes.
Okay.
And then
we'll draft something up.
These will be sent certified, I assume, like a normal notification.
We can certainly do that. Yeah. Sorry, Jack.
Yeah, we don't have to legally.
I think to Councilman Hammond's point, it's not a matter of whether we're required to do this, but we're not required. We just want to make sure that we cross our T's and dot our I's.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a good idea to give them notice, whether they get certified mail or not is what I was referring to.
Oh, I see.
But give them a little explanation of how we got here and why, and if you want to understand it, come to the meeting and we'll explain it. So yeah, we'll work on that, Anthony.
Okay.
Okay, my second question was on page 8.
Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I have to come back.
And in the middle of page 8, just above 12-12.5, there's a review and approval language.
Yes, right here. Here it is. Let's see. Getting too far. Getting out ahead of myself here. So this section right here, review and approval.
All right, so this is for when there is some new development going to happen in any one of these new zones. They're going to come to my office and they're going to say, this is what we want to do. And I'm going to be making a decision on whether the project is so expansive that it has to go to the planning board, or it is within the boundaries of some kind of approval less than the planning board. But there is a section of this where we're now getting to the external view of the property. What kind of outside visuals you're going to have as far as architectural features, which are not really a zoning officer's expertise. And there is some discussion in here about, if the zoning officer feels he needs to bring in another expert to review these plans, there will be a process of some kind of review with this other professional. And I just wanted to know what the thoughts from the planning board were on how they envision that happening.
Jeff, I had questions about this too. First of all, I didn't really understand how it was supposed to work. But secondly, it's not specifically authorized by the MLUL. And I'm concerned about the part where if you approve the development plan, then they can submit it to the planning board or the board of adjustment. And I'm not sure we can prevent somebody from filing an application with either board by inserting this preliminary step that's not part of the MLUL.
Isn't the concept of this item that they would go to Jeff to determine if they're in compliance, they don't need to do anything?
I think people do that now, and they get a zoning permit. But I think even people that ultimately are going to have to go before a board, as a practical matter, they usually confer with borough officials before they file their application. I'm just concerned about the formality of this section.
What if this section just said, if the development plan is not, they don't have to go to anybody, but if the development plan is not in compliance, then they need to go to the planning board and the board of adjustment as applicable. But who determines whether it's in compliance or not?
That's my point. That's exactly my point.
But we already have the requirement for a zoning permit. So if you're going to do something, no construction, reconstruction, you need to go to the zoning officer and get a zoning permit. And if in fact you need board approval, then that zoning permit is not going to be issued at that point in time.
Okay.
So to some extent, it seems to me to be redundant with that section, which is 12-3A.
Oh, what?
12.3A says you get a zoning permit.
12.3A says no construction, reconstruction, alteration, conversion, or installation of a structure, building, etc. Shall be undertaken unless and until a zoning permit is obtained from the zoning officer.
Well, you're looking
Jack's looking at the ordinance as it stands now.
Oh,
that's correct, but I don't think that is this being changed? Yeah, I guess it is.
So let's take that wording and put it here in the process.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
And then say, if the zoning permit is denied, you can go to the planning board or board of adjustment.
Right.
So I think that what you just read, Jack, can replace what's written on, was it page 8, 7, 8? Where is it?
Page 8, yes.
That was page 8, yes.
Page 8.
You see,
So if what Jack just wrote could go on this item C, review and approval, no construction shall occur without a zoning permit. Replaces the wording about the zoning official deems and that kind of stuff.
Yes, yeah. And, I'm going through this with Renee, and we're going through it with an eye of enforcement.
Yeah, no, that's good.
I'm not looking for the nicety and what we want to do to make Bernardsville look better. I'm just looking at it from, well, what if somebody does something wrong? Is the language good enough for me to take them to court or do some enforcement? And to be honest with you guys, I'm not finished looking through all this yet. I've run out of stickies, already. But I
It's
I
a
don't.
good thing we're not introducing this tonight. Then
What?
We need to wait for Jeff's review.
Well, did we agree as a council that we're going to change this 3C to the prior wording with the addition of, if a zoning permit's not issued, then the applicant may submit the development plan to the planning board or board of adjustment as applicable for appropriate relief and approval?
Well, that was our attorney's recommendation, so I'm going along with that.
Yeah.
Does that substantially change what's there now? I think it sounds okay to me, but the process outlined there.
I think the process outlined here, though, Jack Pigeon told us is outside of the MLUL. It doesn't make sense. I don't think the process that was envisioned here is appropriate. I was looking for Jack Pigeon to confirm that.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was just reading through the whole section again.
This is a non-standard process. That's why we're removing it now.
Yeah, I think we could add some of the language from this to the zoning permit requirement possibly, as to what information has to be submitted in particular.
For a zoning permit.
Right. But the problem is that a lot of this may be too formal just for a zoning permit if you're not going to ultimately have to go before the board. It can be fairly onerous to have somebody have to do a final site plan prepared by a New Jersey licensed professional civil engineer to include all this information for something that's not going to require board approval.
So maybe the zoning permit language needs to go into item B, part of item B, and then the C just is, if a zoning permit is not issued, then you can go this other route.
But the other point is that this development plan section applies only, as I read it, to the downtown zone, whereas the zoning permit applies across the board.
Correct.
And I'm not sure, is 12.3A being repealed by this?
My understanding is that to the extent that this ordinance is inconsistent with the general ordinance, this one controls.
I think part of the problem is the overlapping numbers for the sections. Well, because we've got a 12.3. 12.3 in the existing ordinance is building permits and building plans. Oh, this is 12.3. I apologize. Trying to read 3 computers at once.
Keith, the concept of this section was that the applicant can go to the zoning official. The zoning official can administratively approve his plan if he finds in compliance with the section. And if not, the applicant takes it to the planning board or the board of adjustment, right?
That is
correct.
correct.
Understood. But I think that's already the intent of the zoning permit section.
Right.
As I say, we may want to have more detailed requirements in the downtown district in order to get a zoning permit. But I think it would be somewhat confusing to still have the zoning permit, which would be town-wide, borough-wide, and then this development plan requirement.
Yeah, it's just that this change of the ordinance adds all these architectural standards, which are really out of the domain of a zoning officer. And then that's why it talks about bringing in another professional to assist in reviewing these plans, not to necessarily determine whether it should go to the planning board or not, but to determine whether the plan, the architectural standards, they comply with this new section of the ordinance.
Jeff, can I think you got two issues there. One is the issue Jack's raised, as to whether the process works where you get the plan and the difference between plan and a permit.
Mm-hmm.
The second issue is in determining compliance, how would you take care of the architectural standards, which I think is covered in a different section. But it's two distinct problems. Am I wrong?
Well, the second problem is one that we've never had before. We've never told people how to create an architectural feature. We've not had those requirements.
But my other issue, and it strikes me, I'm reading my notes, is whether some of these things would require site plan approval, an amended site plan approval. You know, you're allowing the zoning official to approve basically a site plan the way this is written. And I don't think that authority can be delegated to the zoning officer.
So Jack, I don't understand. How do we deal with somebody who has created a plan or looking to try and create a plan that complies with all of these different requirements? What is the process for them getting it okayed? If the zoning officer doesn't have the authority or the expertise to give them the okay, who does?
The board.
The planning board.
Planning board.
Right.
So,
or the Board of Adjustment,
so
depending on what variances are needed.
So the Downtown Development Committee was envisioning let's call it a streamlined process where the zoning official could okay stuff. But what you're saying is there is no streamlined process for them to use.
You know, and it's an issue across the state. You know, in a lot of towns, we're looking to streamline the process for business approvals. But if you're making these kind of changes to your site, then under the MLUL, you require site plan approval.
Well, so then if we can't have a streamlined process, we should get the wording out for the streamlined process. I think it was an objective that we can't meet. If we can't meet it.
That's my opinion. As I say, we already have the zoning permit requirement that applies across the board, whereas anyone before they get a building permit has to go see the zoning officer to make sure he doesn't require board approval.
I see Keith raising his hand.
Yeah, only because, and I'm not a land use attorney, but I guess more or less want to ask a question. You know, if you have standards, which, you know, in most cases, these standards that are required are pretty specific. They're based on percentages or, you know, some clear measurable quantity, if you will, for these things. And so I'm curious if it's on black and white issues like that, why can't a zoning officer look at a drawing and say, yes, they have met this transparency requirement. Yes, they've met this, you know, placement requirement, landscape requirement, whatever it is, as opposed to sending it to a planning board to do that. I understand the MLUL thing. I'm just trying to understand where the zoning officer, you know, can make a decision.
I don't think you can make a decision in any case where site plan approval
is required. Right.
You know, and here you're recognizing that he can't grant variances, but I think the threshold issue is even for a site plan that does not require variances.
Right.
The zoning official doesn't have that authority. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. If they're all objective standards, then why can't he? Because it would save businesses time and money.
Right.
In order to get an approval, but I don't know of any way under the New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously that's the controlling law here, so we have to adhere to that. But I do want to be clear about the requirements that we have in there, about the elevations and the detailed landscape plan and the all of those sort of drawings that are required. They look and smell and feel like a site plan review, but they're really more intended to just provide the amount of information or the type of information that a zoning officer review. In other words, if I wasn't required to give you a front elevation, the zoning officer would not be able to look on that elevation and see that yes, they do have the right materials or the right percentage or whatever. So it wasn't, we weren't trying to create a site plan review process that competes with what the MLUL said. We're just trying to make sure that the zoning officer had the right amount of information to make the decision. That being said, I will defer to the legal minds.
Keith, I understand what you're saying, but I think the problematic sentence is the one that says, if the development plan submitted is deemed to be in compliance with this section and no variances are sought, then the zoning official can approve the development plan administratively. And I think that's the problem sentence.
Yeah, because
again,
I'm sorry, this section, if you turn to page 29, and you go through the architectural standards, there's a great deal of detail there that's really good, and it's really appropriate what we're trying to achieve. But I don't think it's the zoning officer's position to be making those determinations on page 30 and 31 and 32. I'd have to quote unquote call a friend to come and help me look at these things.
Phone a friend.
So Jack, what's the fix on this? Do we just put all those things into a site plan approval and we don't and get rid of this section C, which provide for the expedited procedure? Can we just graft in what's we do otherwise into this section?
Yeah, like I said, I think the zoning permit section accomplishes all that we can in this area. We could add some more required detail for a downtown application, but we're still going to run into problems with the zoning officer administratively approving something or being the gateway to, or the gatekeeper to get before the board. Because there's already a process. Once the application is submitted, as you know, Jeff, then we have statutory timelines that we have to approve it by. And if the application is complete, which means that it has all of the checklist items, then the clock begins to run and an applicant can get automatic approval. So I don't think we can have the zoning officer deciding under this section that it's not ready to go before the board if it meets the statutory requirements or the checklist requirements for an application.
So again, the fix is to graft into this section the same procedure that's in the general zoning statute ordinance.
I think so, and actually the zoning permit section is relatively new.
I got that open. What section is it?
It is,
Not anymore, I don't.
let's see, I had it open. Hang on one second. Gotta get back there. Works better to spell the words right when you do it. It's 12-3A.
That's in the existing ordinance.
That's right. Yeah, this wasn't adopted until 2015 was the first time, and then it was amended in 2017.
I'm sorry, it's 12 what?
12-3 capital A.
12-12-3 capital A?
12-3A.
This is in the old one.
Oh, sorry.
Right, it's not in this ordinance that's before you tonight, it's in the code.
It's in the existing ordinance.
Are you sure that's the site? I'm looking at Land Development Regulations chapter. I'm not move it up, but so can we do that? Is that a problem incorporating that into this section?
Do you want me to share that?
Yeah.
I don't know that we.
3A zoning permit. So Jack, if we were going to use the 12-3A as a precedent, in section C, we would have to graft onto that all the documents necessary to show the other the conditions that required for under the downtown ordinance.
Well, maybe the best way to do it is leave this section in some form and say, in addition to those documents required for a zoning permit, in the case of a property in the downtown district, the following additional documents are required, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
That sounds reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah, Jack, would you draft some language in the appropriate section to make that?
Sure.
Correct. Thank you.
You know, I'll run it by Keith and Steve Warner as well, and John Szabo.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I do have a question about 12-12.10, which I think will be quick because it references, this is about the prohibited use section.
Yeah.
But there's a number of things that I think should be prohibited, but it also references 12-23.16, which was not in the packet. So I'm wondering whether it's covered in that other thing, in that other section. Perhaps Jeff Price can answer that. But when I looked at the prohibited use section, it didn't have anything there about check cashing centers or massage parlors or sex shops even. Are those covered in 1223.16?
So it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, or if it's not explicitly
permitted use,
an admitted use, it is by default a prohibited use. However, we took the latitude to illustrate some additional prohibited uses that we wanted to make sure were clear. But the understanding of the planning board was if it's not specifically permitted, it is prohibited.
Well, then what is the reference to 1223.16? What is that?
I think that's a blown cross-reference, Jeff.
Oh, that's a what? I'm sorry?
It's an incorrect cross-reference.
Hang on 1 second, let me check.
Well, while he's checking that, then I don't understand the explanation that we have a long laundry list of things that are prohibited. And of course, there is that statement that if it wasn't specifically permitted, it's prohibited. But I can't imagine that there's a couple of things that are nobody in this town would want to see, and we don't list it.
Well, 1223.16 is uses prohibited in all zone districts. So there is some overlap.
Are there things, I mean, so you mentioned a couple there, Jeff. Are there, what would you recommend we add?
Well, I'm a big believer in being explicit about what you want to say. We've and I'm only doing this from memory because I don't have it in front of me, but I remember the list prohibits vape shops, which of course we have an ordinance for, the medical marijuana dispensary. We had an ordinance about that, and a whole host of other things. It doesn't prohibit check cashing outlets. It doesn't prohibit, at least it doesn't name it. Doesn't name massage parlors, doesn't name strip joints. Those are things that I would think we'd want to be declarative about.
Well, there are, there are, and I guess I don't understand I don't frequent these places, but there are places that offer massage services in town. Is that technically a massage parlor? I don't know the distinction between the two.
Yeah. I think what you want, no sex-related type businesses.
Yes. I don't know what the actual word for that is.
Well, if we can't name it, that's going to make it very hard for Jeff Price to say, well, it wasn't enumerated somewhere.
It was in the other ordinance, so we can go take that wording, or not ordinance, sorry, but for the Audi building, the zoning for that, or the last thing that we did for it, it was in there.
The plan. Yeah.
There's a difference between a redevelopment plan, though, and a zoning ordinance. You've got to be careful as to what uses you prohibit because you're running into constitutional questions.
Yeah, and I think the fact that Chad's comments about, if it's not in the permitted, I don't think we have to get every single thing in the prohibited. I think you kind of get the general drift reading through this list.
Yeah, and Jeff Hammond, any of the ones that you articulated, I would say no anyway.
Thank you.
So I have a question along the same lines in the same section. One of the ones that is listed as specifically prohibited is dependent living facilities. And first of all, can somebody define what a dependent living facility is, and then articulate why that would be particularly objectionable compared to other stuff?
Keith, I know that was the discussion that we had at the planning board, and I believe the same question was asked. Do you remember what the actual definition was? And I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. I do not. I recall it as well.
If we're talking about an assisted living home, I mean, Is that particularly objectionable?
No, it's different though. It depends.
No, senior living is different than assisted living.
But dependent. This is dependent.
So
is that?
Yeah,
like
it's
a
dependent assisted living.
Kind of
It was specific to our downtown corridor, Tom. And I apologize. I'm trying to recall the conversation. So if I do it, I misstate. But it had to do with the fact that it's in the downtown corridor. It may not be objectionable outside the downtown corridor, but it wasn't the look and feel that we wanted there. Being different than a senior living facility, which is not assisted.
Is it like a halfway house kind of thing? Is that what you're?
The definition of dependent living facilities is already in the statute. It's in the definitions in section.
I can share if you want the definition section. Yeah.
Well, while he's doing that, I mean, Jack, can you explain to me why, when you said we got to be careful because there's First Amendment issues, we specifically name a bail bonds agency as prohibited, but we don't do a check cashing center.
The other thing beyond constitutional issues is you can't make arbitrary distinctions. For example, you can't, and I learned this several years ago, you can't prohibit gas stations in a retail zone if you allow other retail uses. And the town, I think it was Livingston, made all the arguments that would come to mind that, they're noisier than other retail uses. They have gasoline leaks and things like that. And the court discounted all the arguments that the town made. So there are a lot of issues as to what things you can prohibit, what kind of distinctions you can make between permitted uses and non-permitted uses. It just can't be an arbitrary distinction.
Well, so how do we justify the list that we have here in 12.12.10? For example, 12.12.10M, as in Mary, is pawn shops. Someone who might want to open a pawn shop can say, well, this is a retail business. You allow other sales, retail businesses, gift shops. Why can't I do this? How do we defend that?
I know what you're saying, but I mean, a lot of towns put in things that may be not black and white, that you may ultimately lose because they're trying to encourage a certain kind of retail use. Like I said, you may ultimately lose if somebody challenges it, but it's not always a bad idea to try to define what you're looking for.
Where'd the definition go? You had dependent living.
I'll put that back.
So it actually includes, I think it includes assisted living. So it's a bit more like a kind of nursing care.
Yeah.
Now, are these types of facilities part of COA? I know we just had one constructed on Claremont Road. I don't know whether that was considered an assisted living or a dependent living, but that was the agreement from the planning board for the NGC condo complex, that they create one of these facilities to comply with their COA requirement.
But it's not in the downtown zone. Is that what the?
Yeah, it's not in the downtown zone.
No, but I'm just trying to illustrate that we have those types of facilities and we allowed it.
And I think that the point here, because we had over an hour discussion on this, was while those things are fine within the town, it's not the look and feel of what we wanted to have in the downtown district.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think that's legitimate, as I say.
Yeah.
You can get challenges.
Yeah.
We're not prohibiting it anywhere else, just in that one area. Okay.
Because the whole point of the downtown district is have a walkability, commerce, and restaurant, outdoor dining type of feel.
Got it. Okay.
I have a couple other questions. I think Jeff Hammond had the floor, though.
No, I only wanted to raise the issue about why some things were specifically enumerated as prohibited and other things which we all would agree are objectionable. We're not. I'm just concerned that we may not be as smart as we think we are, and where we say that unless it's permitted, it's prohibited, and that somebody could figure out a way to twist the language to make something that we don't want permitted.
Yeah, I think if there's things that we jointly want to add to that list, I think we do it, Jeff. I think you made good suggestion. I don't know the right word for sexual related businesses, but whatever that means. I think that those are good things. I think you mentioned, cash checking centers. I think that's also a good thing. I think we can add them if we think they're appropriate. So I would support adding cash checking centers. And Jack, if there's a legal word for sex industry based businesses, I don't think we're interested in that as well.
I agree, we're not, but those are the types of industries that have been the subject of the most litigation.
Okay.
I'm sorry to say.
I noticed in Bedminster they have a high-end custom lingerie shop that I wouldn't put in the category of sex shop, but certainly if we make our definition too broad, it will fall into that category,
Here's a quote from Cox, which is the Bible of land use. Relying on the language of NJSA 4055D 62A, that the regulations in the zoning ordinance shall be uniform throughout each district for each class or kind of building or other structures, which is bottomed on the equal protection constitutional imperative that was held in urban farms, that nursing homes and hospitals are uses which are so similar, both physically and functionally, that their disparate classification for zoning purposes could not be justified. So that's an example of what I was trying to explain earlier. You can't make arbitrary distinctions between uses that are very similar.
But I think we could make the argument, Jack, that we do not prohibit or we do not permit hospitals either.
Right, understood. I'm just giving that as an example of how you can't treat similar uses differently in the zoning ordinance.
So is it better, in your opinion, to be silent or to be explicit?
As I say, there are benefits to being explicit and having some things that, though, may ultimately be set aside if there's a challenge. It's worth having in your ordinance.
Yeah.
Okay.
If somebody wanted to find an open piece of property and put in a urgent care center, would that be prohibited?
Under this ordinance, I defer to Keith.
Under this language, or under the one that we don't see, the 122316?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Well, let's just say, there's that property for sale next to the fire station, and I'm making this up. Atlantic Health says we're going to buy it and we're going to put an urgent care center there. One of those dock in the box places.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be prohibited?
If it's not a permitted use, then I would say it would not be.
On the other hand, they would probably.
Well, would it be?
Go ahead, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry.
I mean, does that fall into
businesses?
Does that fall into businesses and professional offices?
That's a great question. I don't know. We'd have to look at the definition. I think it bears noting that with maybe the exception of artisan manufacturing, almost all of the uses or all of the uses in there are directly from your current ordinance, which
Right.
in those uses are defined. So we'd have to look into that to determine whether or not, for instance, a dock in the box would be considered a professional service or would be really considered a medical use.
Well, it's probably medical use, but I don't necessarily think it's an unattractive thing.
Why are we prohibiting medical use? I mean, is that like couldn't be an oral surgeon? Couldn't? I mean, right in the downtown of Basking Ridge, there's a very attractive dentist office.
Absolutely. But a dentist, using that example, is an office, and I think that is perfectly fine. And I'm not saying that a doc in the box or some other type of surgeon is not appropriate in the downtown. I'm just saying that if it's not permitted and you feel like it should be, then it needs to be added to that list. That list has been gone through quite a bit by the planning board, and that's what's driving that. So we just need to address any of those, and that includes the dependent care. I mean, there's nothing that is I think completely off the table, except for maybe the adult-oriented businesses, as Chad pointed out.
Jeff Hammond, Jeff Horowitz, go ahead.
The ordinance, the current ordinance, which is an amendment, defines professional uses to include physicians, surgeons, dentists, osteopaths, engineers, teachers, artists, musicians, lawyers, architects, and other professions, as determined by the approving authority to be similar in character. So one of the permitted uses is professional offices. So I would. There you go. I would think that would cover it.
Yeah.
Urgent care, Jeff.
To that point, Jeff?
And hey, Anthony, can you help me? That's also in the definition section.
While he's calling that up, there's the next paragraph down at Cox says, similarly, where business and professional offices were permitted in a business district and a CO was issued for medical professional offices, it was held that the operation of a methadone clinic was permitted, and the municipality was ordered to reissue the certificate of occupancy that had been revoked. So that's the kind of thing we're dealing with.
Okay.
To that point too, Anthony, so is that definition in, because I don't see it in this ordinance, and I think it should be there.
Which definition are we looking for? Urgent care. I'm sorry, was it urgent care?
No, the professional
professional offices.
Got
it. But I think regardless of the definition, I think the courts expand definitions.
To your point, though, Jack, I think we list this the way that we want.
Yes,
and if we have to deal with things subsequently, we do that then.
I agree.
There's professional uses.
Yeah. I think we need to take that definition and include that in the definitions for this ordinance.
But no, because these definitions apply across the board.
Okay.
So in the beginning of the land use code, you've got things that apply to every zone district and every other section, the site plan, the subdivision, and those are the general definitions. So you don't really want to repeat them in the different sections because you don't want to have inconsistent definitions.
So is professional uses an approved use in our business district, Chad?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Tom, you had some?
Yes, I do. And it's kind of one that touches on three different areas. So 12-12.7, D.
Is that me or you, Anthony?
I got it.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
12-7.
Says as conditional uses permitted in downtown zone in all sub-districts, hotels, automobile fueling, and public garages in the downtown core, downtown gateway districts only, and public utilities. I'm wondering if it would make sense for us to say electric vehicle charging stations, because automobile fueling, I would put electrical vehicle charging into a definition of automobile fueling, but I don't know that we should limit electric vehicle charging to just the gateway and the corridor. The hotel, the Bernards Inn, I think already has a charging station for their overnight guests. And by saying that, automobile fueling stations are only allowed in these two subsections, I don't know if that's forward-looking enough.
Was it number 12-12.7?
Keith wants to answer here. Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I'm, gosh, I don't have it up, but we actually have a requirement in the parking section
Right.
across the board that says if you have a certain number of spaces, you have to provide a certain percentage of electric vehicle charging stations.
2%.
That's correct. That's on page 17.
We didn't consider that to be auto fueling.
That's the other.
So I'm just wondering if we should say automobile fueling, not including electric vehicle charging then, because I don't know, the way you read this, somebody could, and is it important, is it not? I mean, Jack Pigeon, somebody else can say whether or not it's important. I don't know.
I mean, I'll take a stab at this. Again, I think we should be as clear as we can be, but we also have to understand that we're never going to be able to, address every potential issue that might arise.
Right. So let me just point out what I'm thinking of. There is a recharging station that's built adjacent to in Basking Ridge, adjacent to Dunkin' Donuts, and 12 to 15 cars can park in those spaces. It's not like it's an actual recharging station. It's not a plug in a parking spot.
Okay.
And it brings in business. It's quiet. It's relatively odor free. Would it be desirable to have it in somewhere in our town? I'm not saying we should have it. I'm saying we shouldn't say it can't be allowed. That's all I'm saying.
I think it's an absolute great observation, and I'm going to give you purely my opinion on it. I think when a business or whatever it is, a use on a property that is required to have parking provides outlets for electric charging of vehicles overnight or whatever is a great thing. I think if you have a primary use in your downtown that is completely geared to charging vehicles, I don't think that is consistent with the character of your downtown. That's just my opinion. Because again, in that regard, to your point, it does become a fueling station. Yeah. And the reason why the committee was, brought up the issue of fueling stations or gas stations is because it wasn't that's not a useful, that's not a use that is important. It's just that it was not something that was consistent with the character that they were wanting to promote in the downtown.
So what if we wanted to put a bank of 4 charging stations in the train station parking lot in the portion that we control?
Perfectly fine.
Yep. I think that's consistent with the way this is written here, Jeff.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah, I think so. But I think the differentiation that Keith is making, if Tesla, for example, wanted to have a Tesla charging station that replaced one of our properties, then it becomes a gas station or electric charging. I think it's slightly different.
Yeah, fair enough. I agree.
My guess is we'll be revising that 10 years from now. There'll be a lot more electric cars on the road.
Probably so. Maybe so. Hold fast, though. Push them to the edge.
All right, so that does answer my question. So we'll leave it the way it's written. We didn't really, I think, to my understanding, clarify the outdoor dining. I did, at the end of the conversation, have one thought, and it went to some of the comments were already made, which was if it's going to take 90 minutes to have a nice dinner at an outdoor restaurant and you have to be gone, leave or pick up whatever you have and go by 10 p.m., a 90-minute dinner, which is not outrageous, you'd have to be sitting down by 8:30.
I think that should be 11. My personal opinion is that should be 11 o'clock.
And I think we should make it 11 as well, which is what I was going to say. And we can scale it back per the mayor's suggestion if it ends up being too onerous on the neighbors.
Yeah, I feel strongly it should be 11.
But then Jeff Horowitz had suggested if you do that, why not do 1 o'clock on the weekend hours? No, Terry's shaking her head no.
Yeah, I think you need the chief to weigh in on that.
Yeah, that's kind of pushing it.
Yeah, I think 11 is reasonable. I mean, look, we celebrated my son's birthday tonight. We sat down at 7:45. I don't think it's out of the realm in today's world to sit down for dinner at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night.
Okay, so 11 weeknights and still midnight on the Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Yes?
I think that's what
that.
Yeah, I wanted that all along. Thanks.
Okay,
Yep.
good. We got that. All right, anything else?
I have one clerical question on 12-12.14. And I'm just turning to it now. Item I.
Yep.
My screen just got taken over. So now I can't read it. 12-1214, item I.
Fencing.
Okay.
Fencing as required by building codes for terrace roofs is permitted but may not exceed the minimum height required by the building code. Can't exceed the minimum is confusing to me.
Yeah. And I don't know, Jeff, if you can help us here. I know that we went around in a circle on this. Do you remember how that language came about?
Well, yeah, as soon as you pointed to it, Tom, I said, oh God, here we go again.
Yeah, I said the same thing. I'm like, oh God, here we go again.
I had to ask.
How do you not exceed the minimum? I don't get it.
Yeah, but actually, by definition, you
was-
exceed it because it's the minimum.
The idea was that you didn't want, if you had a terrace roof, you didn't want, I believe the idea was you didn't want to see anything along the edge that made the building look taller. So the idea was that if fencing was required by the building code, you could put a fence around the terrace, but it couldn't be taller than the minimum required by the
Code.
Okay, I understand that now.
So
Again,
it says 2 feet minimum, 4 feet highest. We're saying 2 feet.
Got it.
Yeah.
It has to be the lowest that passes code.
Right.
Yes.
right.
Okay, that makes sense.
And if I convince you on this, I'm not going to say anything more.
Yeah, I know, Jeff. Yeah, it's enough.
And I think it's a safety thing. If you're up there on the
Yes.
roof, you need some kind of fence because kids tend to want to fall over these things. So,
Well,
I
I'm
think
not sure
4 feet.
the minimum height's going to be a safety issue.
Well, I think if it's a building code, it's 4 feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so did we decide to include the library in the downtown district?
You know, I'd like to go back to John Szabo and
It
ask.
seems like it might be just an oversight.
Yeah, I don't, Keith, do you ever remember any discussion of changing that? I think that might be a mistake in drafting it. Terry, do you remember that?
I think it is. I cannot recall specifically any
Terry,
reason why we would have included or not included it. So
Can I propose that we include it for the September 14th version, unless John Szabo can come back to us and explain why we would exclude it?
Sure.
Yeah, I'll write John in the morning and ask him what happened.
I'm fine with that as well.
Okay.
You're going to do that, Chad? I'll do it. What do you care?
Yeah, Jeff, you can do it. That would be great.
All right, I have my last item, I think. And at the risk of opening up a can of worms, there was a discussion I think that I had with Councilwoman Zamar. I don't know if she's still on the line. And there was a question about our downtown trying to compete with places like malls that have effectively unlimited parking. And so as we put in parking regulations, and I understand that they've been somewhat loosened from what was previously for our downtown area. is having parking regulations, required parking in such a confined area as our own downtown with such limited space for added parking, is it making us non-competitive with other, choices elsewhere? Does it make our downtown less attractive to businesses? And I just put that question out there. I don't know. And I don't really want to spend another 20 minutes talking about parking, but we want to make sure we're not being business unfriendly unintentionally by putting in parking requirements, which in all reality cannot be met.
Well, I'm not sure that they cannot be met. But my understanding of at least the Quimby Village plan is that there's going to be some significant parking, and much of it underground, so it wouldn't be so constrained. And
I'm thinking of parking outside of Quimby Village. This area is much broader. It covers a lot more.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the Gateway area probably is not a problem. I think the Claremont area is a plus minus. The core would be taken care of as part of the redevelopment plan. So there's only really somewhat of a section of town where that might be an issue.
Keith, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I do. First of all, Councilman O'Day, I want to applaud you. You're one of the few public officials that I've come across that has actually said, hey, maybe we shouldn't require parking at all, or at least reduce it significantly. I think that it depends on the comfort that the community has with those requirements. There is a trend across the country to, at the very least, reduce parking requirements, and at the most, even maximizing, like saying you can't put any more than this amount in there, particularly in areas where you have tight sites and you have a form of development that promotes walkability and everything like that. I think we landed on where we did at reducing this because there was a feeling that, as a destination, as Bernardsville becomes a destination, even more so than it is now, that you're going to be, people are going to have to drive to this. Not everyone is going to walk from surrounding areas. So there was I think a sense that we needed to provide some requirement for parking and balance that out with reducing the requirement, because we understand it's not a completely suburban area in form and character. So I see it as a compromise, but I appreciate the question, and if it needs to be constricted further, I mean, I think that's a conversation that everyone can have. Some communities are doing that, but some communities just aren't ready to commit to it.
So rather than constrict, sorry, who else? Somebody else was talking?
No, that was me. Go ahead, Tom.
So the flip side then, Keith, I would just ask, leaving it where it is, which was a compromise already, a reduced requirement versus what was previously written. If somebody still can't meet that reduced requirement, their remedy is to go, I guess, to the planning board or for the Board of Adjustment for a variance.
That's true. Or that's when we plugged in the shared parking opportunity, and then also allowing them to meet their requirements off-site. So if you leased parking spaces from an adjacent site that had an excess of parking, you could do that. So we tried to incorporate some other ways that a use could meet that requirement.
But ultimately, they could get a variance. And who do they go to, Jack, for the variance?
Board of Adjustment.
Board of Adjustment.
Yeah.
All right.
And again, I think we've made some strides in lessening the burden on parking, and we can amend it if later we see it's a problem with new businesses coming in.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and I think obviously to your point, I know that a lot of our restaurants have started to use their parking lots for outdoor dining.
Yeah.
And I personally believe we should continue that use, and that does decrease the number of parking spaces they have available, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I noticed already, like the Claremont Tavern was doing shared parking with the building on Mine Mount.
Yeah.
You must have paid them to use that lot. So, they're being very creative in how they provide parking.
That's Mr. Ross's lot.
Yes.
Another option is valet parking. If you go to Los Angeles where there's no parking at all,
Right.
every crummy little restaurant has a valet parking system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyone else?
I think to Tom's point, until we actually have some movement on the redevelopment in regards to some larger parking facilities, I think we need to retain some that's in the street and in individual parking lots. So I think it's something we can redress as we go forward.
Okay.
Other questions, comments?
I mean, the only thing for me is going back to the building heights. I just want to make sure that we're all in agreement that 3 stories in this 40 to 45 feet. I went back and I read that little section. It seems clear, I guess, but I just want to make sure that 1, we're all in agreement that it should be 40, 45 feet above 1, and 2, like that it is also then the equivalent of 3 stories, and making sure that that then is consistent with all of the other ordinances that we have that exist around building heights.
Yeah, if it's okay with you, maybe I'll give you my opinion first. So I think for this, now I'm gonna combine 2 issues here. For the redevelopment and the growth of our downtown, I think we need to have 3 stories throughout the corridor, both for our commercial businesses as well as for what ultimately will be residential businesses going forward. So I personally believe that 3 stories is appropriate. And I've been fortunate enough to be part of this since February. And as I walk downtown, I re-envision it. And I'm excited personally about what it would look like in the future. So I'm personally for the 3 stories, and I think it would work. That's just my personal opinion.
Nothing more, nothing less, I guess, is.
Yeah, I think 4 becomes too much, and I think 2 does not provide the amount of housing that we need for the downtown.
Well, I agree with you, but I think it's the 45 feet that concerns me, because I think there's a disconnect. If I remember when I sat down with the topology group, their plan was a max of 40 feet. So isn't there a bit of we ought to be consistent. That's what
I think it's 40, 45 also in Quimby Lane.
But Jeff, if you look at it, you have it's 40 feet to the bottom of the eave, or 45 feet to the top of the parapet. So if you look at the bottom of the eave, 40 feet is where the roof is, right? Where the building ends. And so, and if you look at, I'm looking at page 18 of the proposed ordinance. So let's see, which zone is this for? This is an example. This is for the core.
Yeah.
Okay. So what you provide for is 40 feet. The ground floor has a maximum of 21 feet. And the ground level and each upper level floor is 9 feet. So you got 18 for the 2 upper level floors plus 21 gives you a total of 39. So going along with what Chad said earlier is that if you want buildings that don't look too squished, you want to have fairly high ceiling levels. If you do that, and you want to have 3 floors, that pushes you towards 40 feet.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with that. I'd asked the topology how tall was the Bernards Inn, and I think that was at 40 feet. But I think we want to avoid too much. I think the word that Keith used was massivity.
Yeah.
So we don't want to have a lot of massive buildings. So I wondered whether 45 feet, you get that 1 foot too far, and all of a sudden it changes the look.
But the difference between 40 and 45, Jeff, is that the parapet, which is not part of the building, is usually like 4 or 5 feet tall. That's just the rim around the building.
It's more like a design feature.
Well, it's designed to, it's a structural feature.
Yeah.
And I think for the types of residences that we want, and this is again, I'm offering my personal opinion. You know, if you're building a residence, especially now, you know, most people like to have, you know, 9-10 foot ceilings. I mean, I know I do. This is my personal opinion. I think those things are appealing to potential millennials and or seniors and or other folks that are looking to move here.
It's my opinion that the 3 stories with the slightly higher heights is going to give us the aesthetic that we're looking for. I think that the 3 stories at 30 feet, first of all, it constricts what your first floor level is going to be beyond. You'd have to be lower than the minimum, first of all. Secondly, I think you get an aesthetic that looks somewhat dated. I think the aesthetic that we're going for is classic looking, but more like you see, you know, buildings in historic areas of New York City or Washington, D.C., they have, 12-foot ceilings on some of the floors, 10-foot ceilings. I think that, we're going to get the aesthetic that we want with this slightly higher height. So what you're going to get is instead of a building that looks squat, you're going to get a building that looks much more attractive. And I think it's ultimately the combination of the maximum 3 stories and the slightly higher height, which is going to give us the aesthetic we want.
And I don't disagree with it necessarily, but my other concern is that and I'm talking specifically about the core now, and it's specifically about Quimby, if we're trying to build plazas and parks along the brook, I wouldn't want to have enough buildings surrounding it that it blocks the sun and that it makes that an unattractive outdoor area.
And part of the redevelopment plan is for them to have, light maps showing what it would look like where shadows would be cast. We looked at, requiring variable heights along different streetscapes so that they wouldn't all be the same exact height. So with the Quimby Village, I think we've got a number of discussions that we're addressing exactly what you're talking about, Dr. Hammond. And hopefully we've incorporated into the Quimby Village redevelopment plan, which is more specific, I think, than this. This is an overall zoning plan.
And this goes back to, I think, Tom, your first question, and I think it's the right one. Look, I think we have a real privilege here, to be honest. As we're looking at these various things, we're really having the opportunity to, in lack of a better word, help design the Bernardsville of the future. I don't think there's anything that restricts us from, let's just say that in a month and a half, we're now, looking at the final redevelopment plan and say, look, this probably needed to be switched. Jack, we have the ability to go back to this and say, look, we want to adjust this because we now have a slightly different opinion as we start to mesh all these things together, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we can amend this plan anytime we want. Yeah. Something that we find isn't working.
Yeah, and to your point, Jeff, I think you're absolutely right. There are things that we want in the Quimby that, as we're going through that, may inform a decision that we have made maybe today or in a few weeks or a month.
Yeah, but I think that's so I'm also good with the 3-story thing, but I think that there's just inconsistencies between this and the Quimby Village plan, because as I'm looking at it, it states here that building height stories, if they're 75 feet from Mine Brook Road, are 3 stories, but if they're greater than 75 feet, then they shall be 4 stories. So we're just not being consistent with our.
Are you looking at the Quimby Village one now? Or
yes. I think it's based on the elevation of the way that road. Isn't that what we talked about?
I think there's one specific area where we looked at a 4-story, and it was based on the aesthetic that you were going to get there was I think there was a specific exception that we made for one building.
Yeah. But to Councilman O'Day's point earlier, I
Is that
think
what you're
that's
saying, Mayor?
exactly.
Yeah.
But I think, Tom, I think that's exactly where you said, look, there may not be 100% universality in this. Is if we want to make an exception for the Quimby Lane redevelopment, we do it, but it may not entirely inform a district-wide ordinance that we want to change, right?
Well,
So-
but we need to be careful when we make exceptions that exceptions become rules, right?
But
When people
again-
continue to accept, yeah, but they can request them and say, well, if they did it, why can't we? Same thing what Jack was saying earlier. If you've got a retail space and they're similar, you can't tell somebody else they can't have that.
Yes, we can, because Quimby Lane is designated redevelopment area, which is why they get exceptions. So
Yeah.
if you're not in the designated redevelopment area, you're not eligible for the exception.
Right.
Remember, a redevelopment plan is not just like a zoning ordinance. It goes into much more detail. It's almost a combination zoning ordinance and site plan, which is all negotiated ahead of time.
So what if a building in that same, I mean, so like anything between, essentially anything 75 feet or back that lands within Quimby Village could be 4 stories in, or should be 4 stories. Is what it's saying.
The redevelopment plan for Quimby Village is broken into zones. I think there's 5 or 7 zones, and each of those zones have their own requirements. So just if you're in zone 5, you don't get the same criteria as zone 3, as zone 2, as zone 1. So if you look at the Quimby Lane redevelopment plan, as Jack pointed out, it's very specific. So it's not universal. Just because you're in the redevelopment area, the redevelopment area is broken down into zones as well.
And the other thing is, you're going to negotiate individual redevelopment agreements for any development in the redevelopment area, which is going to get even more specific.
And the council will get to approve on a case-by-case basis.
That's right.
The redevelopment plan. So Councilwoman McCready, no one will be able to do anything without bringing it back to council first.
Yeah, I'm just thinking in 10, 20 years from now, when after that's done and we're all gone and nobody's here to remember the history of it.
They won't be in the redevelopment area then, Councilwoman.
And they're going to be detailed redevelopment agreements. So it's all going to be in writing.
Yeah, that are a permanent record. So
Yes.
Yeah. But that's what I mean. Like once a precedent is set for
It's
that
not
tall of a building.
No.
it
Not
becomes,
necessarily, as long as you can make a rational distinction.
Yeah. And so where and why would we put that rational distinction in writing for future?
it's a whole different legal thing. It's a redevelopment agreement, and a redevelopment plan is very different than our zoning ordinance. It has like a whole different set of guidelines.
If someone else, sorry, Mayor, let you finish. I'm sorry.
No, I'm done.
If somebody wants to do something in the redevelopment area, they have to come to us for approval with whatever they're going to do. The redevelopment plan outlines in fairly specific detail what they're allowed to do in each area of the redevelopment area. If somebody outside the redevelopment area wants to do something, they're going to be limited to the zoning ordinance that was put forward tonight. Only the redevelopment area, specifically in the specific areas that are designated, has a very few exceptions, and those are specific to the effectively the lot that's designated in the redevelopment plan.
And you can, I'm sorry, I thought you were done, Tom.
I'm done.
I was going to say, and you can have different bulk requirements in different zone districts. The MLUL just requires that there be uniform standards within each zoning district.
So did you say, Tom, that at some point the redevelopment area is no longer a redevelopment area? Was that what you meant before? Or is this?
No, well, once the area of redevelopment has been redeveloped, then that's it. It's been redeveloped.
Right. So I guess that's my point, is once it's done and that building is there, then in the future, somebody can come and say, well, that building is 4 stories, so why can't mine be 4 stories?
Because they're not in the redevelopment area.
But it wouldn't be a redevelopment area anymore.
They're not in the redevelopment.
Yeah, they're governed by the general ordinance. It would be the same thing. Let's just say that there was an existence of an 8-story building right now, and that would now be a permitted use based on what was there, historically. It's not different, in my opinion. We talked about, how do we, and Keith went over, when do you need to make the changes? Things that are done now under a certain guidance, they stay as a permitted use, as a use.
And the redevelopment plan stays in effect, just like a zoning ordinance does, unless it's amended in the future. It's not a sunset provision.
So if suppose that area gets redeveloped and then somebody comes along and says, well, I'm buying that building and I want to do something different, they're still guided by the redevelopment plan.
That's right. They have to go to the Board of Adjustment for variances.
Okay. Anyway, so we're back to zoning instead of redevelopment on this particular ordinance. Are there more questions on this ordinance? And I assume, Jeff, you and Renee are going to keep combing through?
Yes, that's correct. We're both working on it, and hopefully we can get something out certainly before the 14th, sometime next week.
Okay, because I think, Chad, what the goal is to introduce on the 14th?
It sounds like, and I apologize, I had to step away a little bit for my son's birthday. It sounds like the changes, Jack has them, if it's permitted, I'll work with Jeff to get them incorporated along with Jack, and then we could resend a marked up document back for introduction in 2 weeks. I think that would be ideal.
Yep.
In the meantime, we're going to notify the people whose homes are changing from residential to business, and the 2 lots that are business changing to residential will be notified, or I guess we should notify all 4 of them, including the 2 utilities that are down near North Finley.
I'll work on getting the lots and identifying and getting them to Anthony. As far as writing the language that's going to go inside the envelope, I'll need Jack's help with that.
Yep.
I think we'll all work on that.
Okay.
Yep. No, I'll work with you on that.
All right. Thank you.
Did we finalize what? Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Are we sending certified? Did we finalize that, or are we just sending a regular mail?
I don't know. How many is it? What does it cost to certify? It can't be that much.
Certified 10 or 12 properties.
It's like $7 and change to per certified mail, usually, unless it's a large document.
Really?
Yeah, it's like $7.70, something like that for one. And it's more if there's more inside the envelope. It is a lot of, but that's about what it is. Yeah.
Is it the same thing? Does it qualify as certified if we have somebody from the borough to deliver it?
No, it wouldn't be that much then.
So that would
what is there's another thing called
subpoenas now.
Other certified is receipt required or return receipt required. Is that different?
That's what we do. We send it certified, so we get proof that we sent it, and then there's a return receipt, and then we eventually get that back when they sign for it, so we know that they received it. So both of those things are about $3 or so each, and plus the postage on the envelope, it's about $7.
Wow.
Per.
Well, we don't. How many do we have? Like 8? You think maybe 10?
I think we could assume 10 or 12 on the upper end.
Yeah. We're talking about $50.
Yeah, do that.
I think we can handle it.
Okay. Yes.
People get scared when they get certified letters.
I know.
They're very intimidating.
Yeah. Okay. Are we good? Yes.
I'm good. I think this was a useful conversation. I can't imagine if we tried to do this at the beginning of September 14th, it would have taken up the entire meeting.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Chad, for suggesting we do this and not zone.
No, and thanks for everybody.
Thank you, Keith, for spending time with us tonight and helping us get through this. Much appreciated.
Glad to do it.
Chad, say happy birthday to your son and apologize for all of us.
Oh, no, we're good. I gave him a hug and a kiss. We went to Bistro's and we survived at monsoon.
I was right in the middle of that big thunderstorm, too.
And then we had ice cream cake, so he was happy.
Good. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move.
And
I'll
a
second.
All in favor?
I,
Opposed? No one's opposed.
yeah, Christine and John dropped off a while ago.
Yes, we're going. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody.
Okay. Bye. Thanks. Good
Bye.
night.
Good night.
Good night.